Chapter 445. Wait a minute. Lu Jun suddenly shouted at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao stopped and looked back at her. What's wrong? Lu Jun said, it's been more than 10 hours. Let me go out and see Tong Tong. Tong Tong must be scared. Lin Xiao patted her head and said, oh, I almost forgot about it. Okay, I'll send you out first. Then she quickly sent Lu Jun out of the space and then flashed back in. Then she continued to walk to the small building. After arriving at the living room of the small building, Xie Dong was stunned to see Elmar come in. But he didn't say anything and just looked at her. After Elmar put on her clothes, the scales on her body disappeared. But the tail was still there. Lin Xiao and the others had long been used to her image with a tail. But after Elmar recovered her memory, she seemed to be particularly concerned about her tail. She looked back every 3 steps and swung her tail every 2 steps. After finding a seat in the living room, Lin Xiao looked at Elmar and said, say what you want to say. If you don't want to keep it in your heart, we can all listen. It's okay if you don't want to say it, but I think it's better for you to say it. Although it's another scar, the thick blood inside still needs to be squeezed out. Qiu Lily nodded and looked at her curiously. Elmar looked at the others and thought for a while. Then she smiled sadly, but it was a smile that was uglier than crying. She said, my name is Elmarch. Actually, I'm from the northeast. But when the apocalypse happened, I was in Beijing. When the apocalypse came, I was still a normal human being. Because I learned martial arts, I spent a lot of energy rushing home to find my family. I was very happy when I found that they were not dead. But after I protected them and sent them to the base, they pushed me into the zombies. Lin Xiao and Qiu Lily looked at her silently. After going through so many hardships to protect her family, she was finally betrayed by her family when she arrived at a safe place. It was really hopeless. Elmar's eyes were slightly unfocused as she said, and it was them who pushed me out. They had always disliked me for wasting their food. Lin Xiao and the others were speechless. Qiu Lily slightly opened her eyes and said, what? Is that why they pushed you out? Your family doesn't treat you like family at all, right? Lin Xiao sighed and said, after the age, human nature has changed. A lot of the darkness in people's hearts has been forced out. That's why the zombies aren't scary after the apocalypse, but humans are. Elmar and Qiu Lily nodded in agreement. On the other hand, Xie Dong and Shen Yuzhen were deep in thought. At this time, Lin Xiao said, but I also have humans here. Although we manage both sides separately, we can't avoid contact. If you don't want to stay here, you can leave when I come back. At this time, Elmar came to her senses. She looked up at Lin Xiao and said blankly, leave? No, I don't want to leave. I want to be with you even if there are humans here. It's fine as long as I don't get close to them. Can't I? She thought that Lin Xiao wanted to drive her away, and her eyes became a little flustered. It was just that her expression wasn't that obvious. Lin Xiao looked at her and was silent for 2 seconds before saying, I'm not driving you away. I just want you to think clearly before making a choice. Maybe if you stay here now, you might regret it in the future. Elmar shook her head. She sat up straight like a serious student. She said, no, I won't go. I won't regret it. I never regret what I've done. Even if I had escorted them to the base, even if I knew this would happen again, I would still choose to escort them. Lin Xiao looked at her determined look and nodded, okay. Since you've said so, I have nothing to object to. What about you? The others shook their heads. Lin Xiao looked at her and asked, so when you were pushed out by them, you were directly bitten by zombies? Elmar nodded. I was injured. When I was about to reach the base, I was injured. When I was about to reach the base, I was suddenly pushed out of the truck by them. At that time, my consciousness was already a bit blurry. So when I reacted, I only saw the truck driving away. And the surrounding zombie horde. Lin Xiao sighed and said, so your family should now be in the base in the northeast. Because you ran to the south. Deep in your heart, you should have rejected that direction. Elmar nodded. Lin Xiao looked at her and said, you're awake. You're not the same person as before. You were like a naughty child before. You even bit my head, do you remember? Fta that. I remember. Ahahaha. Elmar didn't feel good when she was reminded of this. She looked at Lin Xiao awkwardly and said with embarrassment. Qiu Lily looked at her in surprise, huh? When did you bite her head? Ahem. This. Let's not talk about that. Dark history. Elmar's expression was very awkward and speechless. She was a bit stupid before, and the things she did didn't make sense. Lin Xiao said, "You didn't just lose your memory before. Maybe even your mind was damaged. Junjun and I both lost our memories, but we haven't seen such an example." Qiu Lily stared at Elmar and said, "Since Chow Chow said so, your IQ was indeed very low before." Elmar's face darkened and she said, "You can't blame me. I didn't cause it." Who would have thought that not only would he lose his comprehension ability, he would also become like this? Lin Xiao said with a smile, "It's good that you can stay like this. You're also very lucky to meet us. Otherwise, you might have been killed by someone stronger than you and their corpse core would have been taken away before you recovered your memory." Elmar thought about it and replied, "Yes, it's good to meet you." Lin Xiao looked at her and said, "You like children?" Elmar nodded with a smile and said, "Yes, I have no resistance to cute children. I've always been the king of children." She didn't realize that Lin Xiao had successfully diverted her attention. He didn't let her continue to float in the painful memory of being pushed into the fire pit by her family. Lin Xiao nodded and said, "I can see that the first time I met you was because you kidnapped Tiny Tot. You scared me and I thought you were going to do something bad to her." Qiu Lily said, "At that time you followed Xiao Qiao to our territory. If she hadn't warned me in advance, I would have beaten you away." Elmar already wanted to find a hole to crawl into for what she had done in her previous brainless state. However, Lin Xiao said, "By the way, why were you so close to Lily before? I thought you would hug Lily just now." Elmar silently glanced at Qiu Lily and said to Lin Xiao, "She's a neat freak, so she definitely won't let me hug her. If I really hug her, I will only hug empty air. That will ruin the atmosphere." Lin Xiao and the others were speechless. Qiu Lily was stunned and looked at her blankly. "Ah, you really want to do that?" Lin Xiao looked at her and said, "Now that you mention it, I think it's okay. But I have to find a way to communicate with it first." After saying that, she immediately slipped into the woods excitedly. Qiu Lily, who didn't know what to do, looked at her back with a stiff face. She murmured, "If the snake knew that it was my idea, would it hate me?" On the other side, Lin Xiao went into the depths of the woods. She piled up bags of rice and flour in the middle of the woods, as well as a lot of other supplies. Every time she came back, she would give some to Lin Wenwen. Because Lin Wenwen's space wasn't big, he couldn't put so much. Then she saw a 20-meter-long giant snake and a naked dead dog circling around her supplies. Lin Xiao flashed and stood on top of the bags of rice. She shouted at the zombie dog, "Don't play here, you too. If you break these bags, I will kill you too." After saying that, she waved her hand and threw out a black fog. The black mist morphed into a black dragon, baring its fangs and flying towards the two of them. Thus, the two animals that were running happily immediately ran in different directions. The zombie dog Awang also stopped chasing the snake and ran out of the woods barking. Lin Xiao took back the black fog and looked at it, then chased in the direction that the giant snake left. Soon she blocked in front of the black snake and looked at it. Seeing that it was her, the black snake immediately turned around and tried to escape in another direction. However, Lin Xiao flashed again and came to its side. Then the black snake gave up running. It curled up into a small hill and looked at Lin Xiao with its head on its hand. Lin Xiao stood in front of it and didn't say anything. "And then you stare at me, I stare at you." As they watched, King Glasses shrunk its head back. Finally, it was buried in the pile of bodies. Lin Xiao was speechless. She looked at the state of the black snake and found that its injuries were still very serious, although they didn't seem to be getting better. But it didn't get worse, which was already very good. At least it wouldn't die from its injuries. The giant snake also had energy, but its energy had been overdrawn by Tang He, so it hadn't recovered even 1% of its energy. Originally, it needed a good sleep and rest. However, after coming here, it was chased by the zombie dog every 2 or 3 days. It used up the little energy it had just recovered, so its injuries hadn't improved. It could only barely maintain its original state. Therefore, from Lin Xiao's current appearance, it looked very dispirited. Fatigue, hunger and pain were all added together. It would be strange if it could recover. Then it turned around and took 2 small steps toward the giant snake. The giant snake didn't move. It just stared at it. It stretched its head a little higher and looked at the zombie dog suspiciously. Obviously, it didn't know what the zombie dog wanted to do. Chapter 448. For 48, seeing that the snake didn't react to it, Bow Wow made 2 more steps forward. The closer it got to the snake, the stronger the scent of its natural enemy was. The yellow rat in the snake's mouth struggled intensely. At that moment, Lin Xiao said to Bow Wow, "Don't get too close to it. Throw the food at it, then run away." Bow Wow turned and gave her a glance. It thought for a moment and figured out what she meant. It immediately tilted its body, held the rat in its mouth, tilted its head, and then threw the rat at the snake. After that, it quickly turned and ran toward Lin Xiao's tree. It squatted beside the tree and fixed its eyes on the snake. Looking at the live food that was suddenly thrown at it, the giant snake instinctively jumped out and opened its mouth to bite it. Creak! The yellow rat screamed in agony as the king cobra's venomous fangs pierced through its body. The snake confusedly glanced at the zombie dog which had run away, then held the food in its mouth. It quietly looked at Lin Xiao and Bow Wow for a few seconds, then shook its head and opened its mouth. After that, it directly swallowed the rat. It ate the rat. Lin Xiao said to Bow Wow, "Bow Wow, go out and catch more rats. That's not even enough to fill the gap between its teeth." Whoa! Bow Wow was very happy to see the snake eat the food it gave him. Hearing Lin Xiao's words, it immediately wagged its tail. Lin Xiao leaped off the tree and glanced at the rat which had already eaten the meat of a mosquito. After that, she dragged Bow Wow out of the space to catch more rats. This time she followed the zombie dog into the mountain and started looking for rat holes all over the mountain. Xiaodong, Shen Yujin, and the other zombies didn't know what Lin Xiao and Bow Wow were doing, so they just kept doing what they were doing. When Bow Wow showed up the second time with a large rat in its mouth, the snake actually showed a little expectation in its eyes. Of course, it was still vigilant. However, it had more and more doubts. Every time it saw Bow Wow show up with a living rat in its mouth, it would be confused. However, in front of food, it soon stopped thinking so much. Anyway, it was fine as long as there was food. Lin Xiao and Bow Wow had been catching rats for the dog from 3 in the afternoon until 7 or 8 in the evening. They were still catching rats when it was already dark. The main thing was that this guy could eat too much. At first, the snake stayed alert, but when Bow Wow and Lin Xiao showed up, it realized that there was food. Gradually, it adapted to the situation and soon dropped its vigilance against Lin Xiao and Bow Wow. Lin Xiao and Bow Wow spent the whole afternoon catching over 30 different kinds of mice, squirrels, and birds for Bow Wow. Only then did he manage to feed the snake. Although the 2 of them didn't feel tired physically, they were mentally tired. This amount of food was going to make her poor. However, Lin Xiao had already decided to raise the zombie, and she wouldn't change her mind. In any case, once it recovered, it would be able to hunt for food on its own. All snakes were cold-blooded and did not know how to be grateful. Therefore, Lin Xiao wouldn't expect the snake to be grateful to her. She planned to find a way to trap it. With what? With the lake water, of course. She had observed that the snake really wanted to drink from the lake. However, for some reason, it didn't dare to approach the lake. After all, Viney was gone, and there were no living creatures in the lake. Except for energy, there was nothing else. Was it because of energy? Some things would be great if they were given a little bit, but wouldn't be good if they were given too much. Some of them might even be lethal. So, it depended on the situation. Lin Xiao thought for a moment, but didn't know if that was the reason. So, she found an ordinary bucket, which was about the size of a laundry bucket. After that, she filled the bucket with water and brought it to the snake. She didn't approach the snake, but put the bucket on a clearing not far away from it. The snake had regained its strength. In order to avoid Bow Wow, it directly climbed onto a tree and refused to come down. It had spent so much effort to feed the snake, but now that it was full, the snake climbed onto a tree and refused to play with it. Bow Wow, who didn't know how to climb up a tree, leaned against the tree trunk and barked at the snake. "All right, come here first," said Lin Xiao. "I don't want to play with you." "It doesn't want to play with you now. Wait until it wants to play with you. It will come down." Bow Wow unhappily glanced at the snake on the tree, then dropped its head and walked toward Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao brought Bow Wow out of the woods, then looked at the strawberry field and vegetable field which had been cleaned up. After that, she distributed the water to the zombies, leaving Bow Wow lying on the grass, feeling bored. The snake in the woods watched Lin Xiao and Bow Wow leave. After that, it turned its eyes to the bucket that Lin Xiao left behind. It spent a short while observing the woods. After confirming that Lin Xiao and her people wouldn't come back, the snake slowly came down from the tree. After that, it crawled toward the bucket. It raised its head to look at the water in the bucket, then put its head on the water surface and stuck out its tongue to test the water. After that, it suddenly dove into the water. Puff! 2 seconds after its head was in the water, it raised its head. A beam of light flashed across its eyes, and the tip of its tail rose. Outside, Lin Xiao seemed to have sensed something when the snake put its head into the bucket. When the snake dove into the bucket, she gave a confident smile. That trick worked as expected. It seemed that the energy in her lake water was very effective for human beings, zombies, and mutated beasts. After distributing the water to the zombies, Lin Xiao exited her space. Xia Dong and the others didn't stop working even though it was already dark. She didn't pay much attention to them. They were all zombies anyway, so the dark wouldn't affect them. She turned herself invisible and headed back toward the hotel, preparing to check on the little one. On the other side, Wu Yueling started to feel down again, as Lin Xiao didn't show up at all. As it got darker and darker, she pouted harder and harder. She started pounding her cheeks. Wu Chengwei poked her cheeks with a finger and said, "What's wrong? You were so happy earlier today. Why do you want to cry now?" Wu Yueling turned and gave him a glance, then dropped her eyelids and stayed silent. "Let's go and wash our hands and feet," said Wu Chengwei to her. "Then you can go to bed. She might come when you're asleep." Wu Yueling immediately raised her head to look at him. Clearly, she didn't realize that her movement had exposed something. Wu Chengwei was wearing a faint smile, but something had already flashed across his eyes. After that, he took Wu Yueling to wash her hands and feet. After the apocalypse, there was a shortage of water, even though there were water and ice power possessors. However, he still needed to teach his daughter how to save water. Therefore, he gave his daughter a bath every other day. If he didn't have a bath, he would wash her face, hands, and feet. Chapter 449. 449. After washing Wu Yueling's face and feet, Wu Chengwei carried her to the bed. "Be a good girl and lie down." He put his daughter on the bed, then covered her with a blanket. After that, he rubbed the soft hair on her forehead. Wu Yueling closed her eyes expectantly. After that, Wu Chengwei turned and walked into the bathroom, quickly taking a shower. After that, he walked out of the bathroom in a pair of long pants and indoor slippers, his upper body bared. He sat down on the couch. On the table was a bottle of wine and a glass. In the post-apocalyptic era, wine was the favorite thing of all men. Many of them could be found because they could be stored for a long time. He picked up the bottle and opened the cap, then poured a third of the wine into the glass. That was a bottle of vodka. Wu Chengwei dropped the bottle and put the cap back on, then picked up the glass and leisurely leaned against the couch as he poured a mouthful of vodka into his mouth. The vodka was light and smooth, yet it gave him a strange fire-like stimulation. It went from the tip of his tongue to his throat, and then to his stomach. He narrowed his pretty eyes, enjoying the fire-like passion. From time to time, he glanced at the only open French door on the balcony. When Lin Xiao came in, she saw that man drinking alone in the living room. She glanced at him with surprise, then prepared to walk into the living room. However, she stopped after making 2 steps. Her eyes dimmed slightly, then she turned to look at the man on the couch, as she thought he seemed to have sensed something. He put the glass on the table, then stood up. After that, he walked to the French door as if nothing had happened, then raised a hand to close it. The door was locked. "Since you're here, let's make things clear before you leave." He smilingly turned to look at Wu Yueling, who was lying on the bed in the living room. Lin Xiao didn't know what to say. Hearing her father's words, Wu Yueling immediately realized something. She hurriedly got up from the bed, then sat on the bed and fixed her eyes on the glass door. Lin Xiao sighed, then showed up in the living room. She ignored Wu Chengwei, but walked straight into the living room, Seeing Lin Xiao, Wu Yueling's eyes glowed as she happily watched her walk in. This time Lin Xiao looked different from the one in Wu Yueling's memory. Her face was still the same, but her hair had grown longer. They were black and thin, hanging softly on her shoulders. Also, the whites of her eyes were eerily black. However, the two eyes in the middle were shining with a green light. Compared to the black eyes on the side, these two eyes were like green stars in the dark night sky. There was a strange sense of beauty. Wu Yueling looked into her eyes curiously. Lin Xiao walked to her bedside and sat down, then rubbed her head. He said, "Look, I kept my promise and came to see you. Be happy." Wu Yueling looked at Lin Xiao with her sparkling eyes and nodded. Lin Xiao dropped her hand and said, "All right, I'm here too. Can Lingling sleep now?" Wu Yueling just looked at her and didn't lie down. Lin Xiao had no choice but to hold her little hand and feel her heart. She said, "Don't leave tonight, okay?" Lin Xiao looked at her and smiled helplessly. Then she said, "I'm going to a faraway place to do something soon. I don't know when I'll come back. Lingling, you need to follow your daddy back to your home. I'll go to your home to see you when I'm done with my business, okay?" Hearing that, Wu Yueling was a little unhappy. However, she didn't stop Lin Xiao from leaving. Her daddy had told her that going to do something was like going to work. Adults needed to work to earn food. Without work, they would have no food. Without food, they would starve to death. She nodded when she heard that Lin Xiao would go to her home to play with her after finishing her business. Lin Xiao abruptly put her mouth near her ear and whispered to her, "Do you want to talk to Viney?" Hearing that, Wu Yueling's eyes glowed. That little bit of unhappiness just now immediately disappeared. She quickly nodded at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao gently put Wu Yueling's little hand on her lower abdomen and let her touch it. Then Viney's voice was heard, "La la la, little one. Did you miss Viney?" Wu Yueling nodded. Viney said, "But Viney needs to sleep often to grow up. So I can't come out often to talk to you. Little one, you need to be happy." Lin Xiao quietly listened to the two little ones without saying anything. A while later, Viney said that she was tired and wanted to sleep. She told Wu Yueling to go to bed early. Lin Xiao comforted her and said, "All right, go to sleep. If you don't sleep well, you won't grow tall." Wu Yueling didn't know why she needed to grow taller, but she was aware that not growing tall was a bad thing. So she immediately lay down obediently. This time she was finally going to sleep for Real. After saying that, Wu Chungyue sat back on the couch. When Lin Xiao came out, she found a glass on the tea table before him. A third of the wine was poured into the glass. "Please sit down." Wu Chungyue smilingly glanced at her, then pointed at the couch beside him. After that, he pushed the glass of wine to her. Lin Xiao sat down, then curiously picked up the glass. She put it under her nose and sniffed at it, then said, "Have you ever seen a zombie drinking wine?" Wu Chungyue smilingly raised his eyebrows as he looked at her and said, "Didn't I see it now?" Lin Xiao glanced at him blandly and said, "I haven't drunk it yet." Wu Chungyue said, "You're moving like a person who often drinks. Why don't you try a sip? Does alcohol work on zombies?" His words sounded casual, but he was trying to provoke Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao shook her head and said, "No one has tried that yet. Why don't we talk about what you want to talk about first?" She knew that since Wu Chungyue had been waiting for her tonight, she wouldn't be able to leave without talking to him. Wu Chungyue lazily leaned against the back of the couch as he gripped the rim of the glass and gently shook it. He stared at Lin Xiao's green eyes and said, "Shouldn't you be the one to talk first? I feel that I should be the victim. You should apologize to me." Lin Xiao didn't know what to say. He wanted her to apologize right away. Damn! How was she supposed to talk to him? She wasn't the one who got him in here. What did that have to do with her? Why did he want her to compensate him? She said calmly, "Wait a second. I'm a victim too. I don't think either of us will have to compensate the other, will we?" Wu Chungyue gave her a meaningful smile and said, "What if I say that? I don't want you to compensate me for this one time? Don't want you to compensate me for this one time?" Lin Xiao looked at him with confusion. She had only done it with him once. Did he want her to do it again? Wait a second time. Lin Xiao suddenly narrowed her eyes and blinked. After that she said, "I get it. I thought if you're talking about that one time, I'll compensate you for that one time. I've saved Ling Ling a couple of times, so I don't think it's worth it. Chapter 450. For 50. Lin Xiao understood what the man meant by his words just now. She didn't expect him to find out that she was Lu Tianyu so soon, even though she was in Lu Tianyu's body. However, she was Lu Tianyu now, so she had to take responsibility for everything that woman had done before. Wu Qingyue's smile grew bigger as he nodded and said, "Yes, you're right. According to what you said, it does cancel out the fact that you kidnapped Ling Ling to threaten me. But there's one more thing that you didn't do, and that is my innocence." While speaking, he stared at Lin Xiao with a strange light sparkling in his eyes. Lin Xiao didn't know what to say. If he had shouted the last sentence at her, she might have really believed him. But what was the meaning of the other party's scheming smile? Did he think that she couldn't tell that he was trying to trick her? She finally put the glass on the table and said with a faint smile, "I think that as an adult man you should be open-minded about things like that. You're not a woman from hundreds of years ago. You have to take responsibility for what you've done. Besides, are you still a virgin?" Hearing that, Wu Chengyue's smile cracked a little. He quickly glanced at the ceiling, then adjusted his expression and looked at Lin Xiao. "I used to have a girlfriend, but I broke up with her 10 years ago. I've been keeping my chastity, unlike some people." While speaking, he glanced at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao immediately felt that Lu Tianyu's body and identity made her seem shorter. She cursed in her head. Why the fuck did she have to run over to this woman? How unlucky. However, her expression didn't change. Her green eyes flashed. Her green eyes sparkled as she said with a faint smile, "I'm just having fun. That's a little far from what we're talking about tonight. Since you think that I've saved Ling Ling 3 times, no, twice, but still can't clear your so-called innocence, just tell me. What do you want? As long as it's not too difficult for me, I might be able to say yes." She knew that she would be at a disadvantage because of Lu Tianyu's identity, and she had already made it clear, but still, she left herself a way out. Wu Chengyue was too smart, and might not be easy to fool. "About that," said Wu Chengyue, "I'll tell you when I think about it. What do you think? Do you want me to give you a long-term check? And then you can come and get it whenever you want?" Wu Chengyue nodded and said, "That's right. You can think of it that way if you wish." Lin Xiao looked at him with confusion. The other party actually didn't make a request. Although on the surface, it was said that he still owed him a request. He didn't know what he would ask for in the future. But the way he was talking about it now, it was obvious that he was giving her an invisible path behind her back. Moreover, the future situation was unpredictable. Who knew what kind of relationship they would develop in the future? In any case, it was unlikely that they would become friends. Lin Xiao wasn't unhappy about that answer. Such a request was better than him directly asking her to do something. She needed to have some leeway. She thought for a moment and nodded. "Okay, then we'll talk about it when you want to. Regardless of whether our relationship in the future is ordinary or bad, I will not refuse." Lin Xiao sighed in her head, thinking that she had come back to life. Yet, he still had to deal with such a huge problem for this woman. He really didn't know if he was lucky or not. Or was it bad luck? She wouldn't be able to avoid that problem sooner or later, so she decided to face it directly now. Wu Chengyue looked at her and abruptly said, "You really don't look like the same person as before." Lin Xiao looked at him in the eyes and suddenly sensed something. She asked, "Is it that if I were still the same as before, you might not be able to talk to me calmly here?" As she expected, Wu Chengyue blinked. He nodded and said, "You're right. If you were still the same person as before, I wouldn't even look at you." Lin Xiao rolled her eyes and blurted out, "Then don't look at me." She couldn't wait to see that. Seeing her roll her eyes, Wu Chengyue paused briefly. Her expression gave him a strange feeling in his heart. It was very novel and very strange. However, that feeling didn't make him dislike it. On the contrary, he was a little touched. He thought for a moment about what he wanted to talk about this time, then said, "You and I didn't initiate this. It was an accident. You and I don't need to take responsibility. But if I guessed right, you're pregnant, right?" After saying that, he couldn't help but glance at Lin Xiao's belly. His eyes glowed with a strange light. Lin Xiao automatically put a hand on her belly and said unhappily, I know that even if you don't tell me, but I want to know how you got into the water. Also, how did you get into my space? Wu Chengyue raised his eyebrows and said, You need to ask the thing in your belly. She dragged me in when I wasn't paying attention. After that, she gave me a strange scent. That's why I got into the water in a daze. I'm the victim here. You can't blame me for that. Lin Xiao gave him a cold glance and said, If you didn't send Ling Ling to that place, how could you be dragged in by Viney? She was going to drag someone else in, but you bumped into her yourself. Hearing her last sentence, Wu Chengyue's expression froze slightly. For some reason he suddenly felt unhappy. Why did her words sound so unpleasant to his ears? What did she mean? Was Viney going to find another man to do that with her? She wondered. How could that happen? Once that thought popped up in his mind, Wu Chengyue automatically rejected it in his heart. He refused to let that happen. Wu Chengyue stared at her and said, So, are you saying that you don't mind whoever it is? So you won't mind if it's me, right? Lin Xiao responded blandly, It happened once, so I won't mind if it happens again. I didn't want to do it, but it was an irresistible situation. I had no choice. If it's someone else. She thought for a moment. If it was someone else, it would be the same. It didn't matter who it was, Wu Chengyue or some other man. To her, it didn't make a difference. Under that irresistible situation, she had no choice but to accept it. Sometimes some things happen suddenly, but the more you cared about it, the more it would affect your life. Therefore, you might as well accept it. That would make your life much easier. No one else can do that. Wu Chengyue narrowed his eyes and abruptly interrupted her. His tone was somewhat displeased as he said, Since you've already attacked me once, then you have to be responsible for me. So you don't have the right to choose another man. You can only choose me. Lin Xiao paused briefly upon hearing his strong and domineering tone. Chapter 451. Lin Xiao stared at him with a strange expression and said, Even if you had sex with me once, so what? You can't control me, right? Do I need you to tell me whether I choose someone else or not? What's more, if I need a man to help me level up, of course I want to choose a suitable person. After Wu Chengyue said those words, he regretted it. He didn't know why he suddenly felt an inexplicable anger and couldn't control himself. He was silent and looked at Lin Xiao without saying anything. He also realized the difference between Lin Xiao's current attitude and his. Wu Chengyue had already silently regarded Lin Xiao as his own person, but Lin Xiao didn't have this awareness. In her mind, there was nothing between the two of them. Even if it was just a physical relationship, it wouldn't change her mind at all. Because she had always kept a distance from him like an ordinary business partner. They weren't even ordinary friends. If it wasn't for Ling Ling, the two of them probably wouldn't have such a deep connection. Lin Xiao looked at his silence and suddenly said, Let's talk about our second relationship. Let's not talk about the fact that we were both tricked. Those who didn't know were innocent, so no one was wrong. What's more, you didn't lose anything. You just lost a bunch of little tadpoles. You clearly worked hard. Ahem, if it wasn't for you helping me level up, I think I would be the one who suffered. She couldn't help but look at the ceiling awkwardly and then stared at him. Wu Chengyue's eyes flashed. He didn't say anything and just looked at her eyes. He felt that when she said the words I'm clearly working hard, she seemed to have an awkward expression on her face. He didn't know if she knew that after her body was repaired, her membrane was broken again. He also didn't know if she would explode. He didn't know if she was aware of this. If she didn't know, she would definitely know in the future. In the future, she might blame it on him and say that he didn't tell her about this. But she also had the right to know. But if he said it now, would it directly push her to a position even further away than she was now? Wu Chengyue was considering this in his heart. Lin Xiao said, If you want to make a fuss about the first time, I don't think I owe you anything. Ling Ling has already been returned to you. If I force myself on you, have you forgotten that you struck me with lightning? Although I didn't die that time, I wasn't much better off. Don't tell me that time when I got hit by your wall for nothing and later when I helped you save Ling Ling couldn't make up for it? Why are you so narrow-minded? You even bit my thigh. How should this be calculated? No matter how you look at it, I'm the one who's at a disadvantage. Why did Wu Chongyue feel that he was really a little narrow-minded after her calculation? He said weakly, "Didn't you just steal my zombie king's corpse core?" As he spoke, he put the cup in his mouth, poured a mouthful into his mouth and swallowed. He said with a smile, "The wine is very good. Do you really not want to try it?" Lin Xiao leaned on the back of the sofa, glanced at him and said, "Since we've made it clear, then we don't owe each other anything. For Lingling's sake, I'm still being polite to you." As she finished speaking, she stood up and turned around to leave. But after 2 steps she turned back. She picked up the bottle on the table that still had 80% of the wine left, and disappeared in a flash. Wu Chongyue silently looked at the place where the bottle was taken, and then he saw the glass door open and then close, but he couldn't see the person who opened it. He silently said in his heart, "How can we not owe each other anything? You still owe me a baby. Do you think I'll forget this?" But looking at her attitude, Wu Chongyue also knew that he couldn't force her too much. If he forced her into a corner, she would leave this base with the baby in her belly and run away to the north and south of the river. Where would he find them? But Wu Chongyue didn't know that even if he didn't force her, she would still run away. After Lin Xiao took the bottle of wine into the space, she left. She went to the roof of the hotel, stood at the highest position, and roared towards the sky. Soon several zombie leaders came from all directions. Lin Xiao changed the water in their bathtubs and let them sit in the bathtubs by themselves. She walked back and forth outside their bathtubs and said, "You can stay in the bathtubs until tomorrow morning. I'm going out to do something and it may be a month or 2 before I come back. While I'm away, I'll ask Ming Ming to watch over you. You can go to her if you need anything." The zombie leaders looked at her and just nodded, accepting her order. They were not interested in where she was going and what she was going to do. After thinking for a while, Lin Xiao finally went to see her mother. Hearing the knock on the door, Mrs. Lin opened the door and looked at Lin Xiao with surprise. She hadn't seen her for days. Standing at the door, Mrs. Lin couldn't help but ask, "What? You're back?" Lin Xiao nodded. Mrs. Lin looked at Lin Xiao's eyes, wondering why her eyes were a little different. But she didn't care. She turned around and opened the door. "Do you want to come in? Do you have something to talk about?" Otherwise, she wouldn't have come to see her in the middle of the night. Lin Xiao nodded, then lifted his foot and walked in. She walked to the sofa in the room and sat down as if she was very familiar with him. After closing the door, Mrs. Lin turned around and walked over. "Did you come back so late at night? I heard from Lin Feng that you've been catching zombies to farm. I can't believe you can still do that," Mrs. Lin said with a smile and was about to pour a glass of water for Lin Xiao. However, halfway through, she suddenly remembered that Lin Xiao had become a zombie and didn't seem to need to drink water. Mrs. Lin stopped and turned to look at her. "Well, do you want to drink water?" Lin Xiao shook her head with a smile and said, "My body doesn't need to replenish water because the supernatural energy and the zombie virus are maintaining my functions." Mrs. Lin doesn't understand and nods. "Oh, I see." She sat down and looked at Lin Xiao. "If you don't drink water, can you only eat raw meat? By the way, zombies eat human flesh. Is it really okay if you don't eat it?" Lin Xiao smiled and said, "You have to know that I'm different from ordinary zombies. Although human flesh may taste better to me, even if I don't eat it, I can eat other raw meat. I just changed into a zombie's body and lived in another way. It doesn't mean that I have to become a zombie without humanity." Mrs. Lin breathed a sigh of relief and said, "No, I'm worried that it will affect your body if you don't eat human flesh." Chapter 452. Seeing that Mrs. Lin was worried about her health, Lin Xiao felt warm. She smiled and said, "I'm fine. I'm fine. And as you can see, my situation is getting better and better, isn't it? Although it's impossible for me to turn back into a human, we are not zombies who have lost our minds. We are just living in another identity and way. As long as I am still alive, these are not problems." She comforted her mother and said. Mrs. Lin was still a little uneasy and said, "But if your identity is known by everyone, they will not accept it. They definitely won't accept it. What are you going to do if they make a fuss?" Lin Xiao said, "I have talked to Tianxing about this, but he doesn't know that I am Lin Xiao, so he has always regarded me as a zombie named Lu Tianyu. In his eyes, I am at most a mutually beneficial relationship with him. I can barely be regarded as an alternative partner. Mrs. Lin looked at her and said, in that case, he won't trust you completely. That's right. Yuan Tianqing just regarded Lin Xiao as a strange zombie. He felt that Lin Xiao had been protecting them for some reason. So because of this, even if they were now in a cooperative relationship, he still kept a vigilance in his heart. After all, he didn't know that the current zombie Lu Tianyu was Lin Xiao. So from a normal person's point of view, although he wouldn't have the intention to harm others, he couldn't be without the heart to guard against others. Lin Xiao nodded and said, yes, I saw his guard against me, so I drew a line with him and signed a treaty with him. So I planned for the worst situation of zombies in the future to make him relax his vigilance against me. Otherwise, when I try my best to help you, I can't let a guy who doesn't know the situation become a pig teammate to cheat me. When Mrs. Lin heard that she compared Yuan Tianqing to a pig teammate, she thought about Yuan Tianqing's image. The two were simply too different. However, she couldn't help but say with a smile, indeed, if your identity is not a zombie, it's not a big problem. Now only we know your identity and those outsiders don't know. I'm afraid that if the human power in this base becomes stronger in the future, if your identity is exposed, can you still stay here? Lin Xiao said with a smile, don't worry about this. Yuan Tianqing and I will divide this base into two parts. Therefore, in the future we will not interfere in the territories of the humans. Therefore, we ask the humans not to interfere in our territories. Furthermore, I will train my zombie strength, my own strength and army. Believe me, my troops will be a strange army in the apocalypse. We won't attack humans, but we won't let humans bully us either. This was the decision she made after thinking about the future situation of these mutated zombies. So during this period of time, she searched for level 4 zombies to see if she could train an ordinary zombie army. These zombies didn't need to mutate, they didn't need to have humanity, and they didn't need to have memories. She would limit the amount of water that replenished them, because she suddenly found that her lake was now more powerful. Except for Xiaodong and Shen Yuzhen, who were affected by her when they were turned into zombies, Lu Jun and Elmar recovered their memories by themselves under the effect of her lake water. The zombie army that Lin Xiao wanted did not require them to recover their memories. Because if his memories were restored, there might be many unpredictable changes that would occur. Mrs. Lin looks at her in surprise and says, I didn't expect you to think so far ahead. But she soon realizes that Lin Xiao is such a person. She nods and says, okay, I think you are used to leading soldiers. Even if you become a zombie, you still want to build a zombie army. However, in order to survive in this era, having a strong army is also very necessary. Mrs. Lin sighs and continues to ask, how many have you caught now? You arranged zombies on the 5th floor of the hotel, right? It seems that you sent some to guard outside? Lin Xiao nods and says, yes, except for Tong Tong, they are all zombies. Moreover, they were all high-level zombies with strong human nature and control abilities. I've sent those inhumane zombie leaders who don't have strong control outside to guard the entrance. Mrs. Lin nods and says, oh. Lin Xiao then talks about the purpose of tonight's visit. But I will leave for a while tomorrow. I may not come back for a month or two. So, don't go to the 5th floor and don't go out of the wall of zombies. If anything happens, go to the 5th floor and find Meng Meng. She has recovered her memories. So don't be afraid of her. Mrs. Lin looks at Lin Xiao in surprise. Meng Meng? Was it the girl who looked very young like a middle school student but had a childish air? And half of her face had strange scales growing out of it? Has she recovered her memories? They were no strangers to Meng Meng. Lin Xiaolu used to bring Tong Tong along to play with her. At first, they were worried that this strange zombie would suddenly go crazy and attack Xiaolu and Tong Tong. But later, they found that Meng Meng is actually very innocent when she is with the children. Lin Xiao nods, yes, that's her. Mrs. Lin asks, you said you will leave for a month or two. Where are you going? Lin Xiao looks at her and says after thinking for a while, I am going to Pluto's base and find the place where I lost my memories. Mrs. Lin stares at her for a few seconds and says, You are going back to Pluto's base? But isn't it dangerous? Yang Jianhua and the leader of the base are there. What if you meet them? Lin Xiao says, Mom, don't worry. I will avoid them. I have no memory of them now. Even if I meet them, I won't be excited. Besides, they won't recognize me now, so I don't need to be afraid. Besides, I have the space. It's easy for me to escape. Hearing her confidence, Mrs. Lin nodded. Although she was still a little uneasy, she knows her daughter well. As long as Lin Xiao decides to do something, she will think of many ways to do it. So, even if Mrs. Lin wants to stop her, she won't listen. After thinking for a while, Mrs. Lin asks, "Do you want to see if you can recover your memories? But it's strange that you can recover other people's memories. Why can't you recover your own?" Lin Xiao says, "I don't know. I always feel that I lost something in the south. So I am going to find it. Maybe I can recover my memories if I find it." Mrs. Lin finally understood and said, "I see." Chapter 453. Lin Xiao said, "I'm just here to tell you. I'm afraid that you will be worried if you don't see me for a while." Mrs. Lin looks at her, sighs and says, "But you are going so far and it's such a dangerous place. I'm worried about you too." Lin Xiao said, "Don't worry. I brought Lily with me. I believe that we can work together unless we encounter more than 3 level 7 paranormals. Otherwise, we won't have a problem." Mrs. Lin could only nod. "Well, anyway, be careful and come back, okay? Don't be like last time." Speaking of this, Mrs. Lin suddenly becomes silent. Lin Xiao called her again. "Mom, don't worry. I will be careful for you." Mrs. Lin looked at her and couldn't say anything else. Lin Xiao stood up and said, "I'll go to the roof first." Mrs. Lin stood up and walked her to the door. After Lin Xiao walked out, she stood at the door and watched her leave. Lin Xiao turned around and glanced at her mother before heading upstairs. She didn't show up because she wanted to avoid Wu Changyue. Now that she has talked to Wu Changyue, there is no need to hide. When she got to the roof, she lay on the roof of the stairwell. There is a mat made by Cho Lily, so Lin Xiao lies on it and looks at the sky. The night sky after doomsday is dark. There are no stars and no moon. It's not that there are no stars, but it is covered by the dust and miasma in the air. The night wind is very cold. Lin Xiao can't feel the cold like a human being, but she can still feel a trace of coolness, which is just right for her. She lies on the bed for the whole night. Lin Xiao directly turns over and shouts to the zombie leaders who have been soaking in the buckets all night. Get up, get up. It's dawn. It's time." As soon as she speaks, the zombie leaders immediately climb out of the buckets. Even the old man who slept for the whole night climbs out of the buckets by himself. Then he leisurely puts on his middle-aged and old Tang suit. After they put on their clothes, Lin Xiao doesn't need to say anything. They all turn around and jump out from the side of the building and go to their own area. Lin Xiao poured the black mist into the bucket that they had been soaking in. Then he watched as the water turned into black mist and rose into the air. When the bucket was empty, Lin Xiao waved his hand. He sucked in the black fog. Then she turned around and hid herself. In a flash, she rushed out in the direction of West Lake and leaped over the roofs of buildings. After getting out of the zombies' encirclement, she landed on a road a few kilometers away from the base. Then, with a wave of his hand, an ordinary black off-road vehicle appeared on the road surrounded by abandoned cars. Lin Xiao took out her sunglasses and put them on. Then she sat in the driver's seat. She did not ask Cho Lily to come out. She knew that Cho Lily did not like the dust on the road, so she had to drive alone. The car drove along the Qinjiang River to the Shihu district. When they were near the Hangzhou Zoo, Lin Xiao slowed down. She stopped the car at an intersection and got out. Then he released Ah Wang. Roar Wu. As soon as Ah Wang came out and found himself in a strange environment, he immediately raised his head and roared. It was as if he was notifying the surrounding animals that he was coming. Lin Xiao did not release the giant snake because it had not matured yet. At least, it was not dependent on the lake water that she had given him. So she could not let it out, because once she let it out, it would definitely run away. Roar, however, after Ah Wang's roar, there was a sudden burst of roars coming from the surrounding forest. Lin Xiao's location was actually not at the zoo yet. But from the sounds, it was obvious that the area had been occupied by those animals. This had always been a forbidden area in Hangzhou. Lin Xiao lifted her leg and kicked Ah Wang, who was beside her. "What are you shouting for? Are you afraid that they won't know that we have invaded their territory?" "Roar." Wang was immediately excited when he heard the responses of so many animals. Although he did not understand what they were roaring about, the response meant that there was prey. Lin Xiao put the car into her space and walked toward the zoo. But before she could go far, a huge bird flapped its wings and flew towards her from the sky. Lin Xiao looked up and saw that it was a giant red-crowned crane. But the crane looked a little fierce. A huge bird with a white body and a black tail was in the sky. When it spread its wings and flew toward Lin Xiao, it was about 4 to 5 meters wide. It was huge and its claws were thick and long. But its elegant appearance had now become a little terrifying. Its slender legs had become very thick and powerful. The hooks on its claws were shining with a cold light and were sharper than the claws of an eagle. There were also a few horns on the red crown on its head. There were also some hard scales growing on the sides of his mouth. His eyes were sharp, and there was a fierce and vicious aura in his eyes. Lin Xiao sighed when she saw the fierce red-crowned crane taking the initiative to attack. Even red-crowned cranes had become so fierce after the changes of the apocalypse. Roar! The red-crowned crane opened its mouth and roared ferociously. It was very fast, and because of its size, it rushed toward Lin Xiao with a gust of wind. Obviously, its target was Lin Xiao, and it did not seem to be interested in the zombie dog beside her. Lin Xiao stood there calmly and watched it rush out. She stared at it without dodging or avoiding it. Roar! The zombie dog retreated 2 steps to the side. As the red-crowned crane charged down, it flapped its wings furiously, instantly increasing its speed by a notch. In the blink of an eye, it extended its legs and grabbed Lin Xiao's head at lightning speed. When Lin Xiao saw that it was about to grab her head, she suddenly tilted her head and moved her hands. She quickly attacked with both of her hands and grabbed the crane's 2 thick and long ankles. She followed the force of the red-crowned crane's charge and slammed its legs on the ground. Then she swung her hands to the side. She swung it towards the zombie dog that was already prepared. Roar! The zombie dog immediately pounced forward and pounced on the red-crowned crane with its claws and teeth. Chirp! The giant red-crowned crane did not expect its prey to dodge its attack and even grab its leg. Before he could even react, he was slapped to the ground with a bang. And with a shake he fainted. Before it could react, the zombie dog pounced on it, roared, and bit its head with its mouth wide open. Then it fiercely swung its head. Splat! The red-crowned crane's head was cleanly torn off by the bird's mouth. Red blood splattered everywhere. The headless crane was still flapping its wings and struggling with its legs. But it was firmly held down by the zombie dog. Chapter 454. Why did you bite off its head? I wanted to catch it alive. Lin Xiao looked at the headless crane and then at Wang, who was chewing on the crane's head. She was speechless. Crunch! Wang chewed on a bloody crane head and looked up at her. Lin Xiao sighed. All right, forget it. Such a big one anyway. That stupid snake can't swallow it. But it doesn't seem to eat dead ones. I'll have to catch a smaller one for it later. This one is too big. She looked at the crane's body, which was slowly becoming motionless. Then she flashed her claws. Take your claws away. I'm going to skin the bird. The feathers are pretty good. I'll take them. Then she pushed the zombie dog to the side and began to skin the crane's skin. She had already mastered the skill of skinning living creatures without bleeding, so she began to peel the bird's skin with familiarity. The layer of fibrous tissue under the feathers was carefully cut open with her fingertips. Then she pulled out the skin along with the skin. Moreover, this crane was very big. Lin Xiao circled around it for an hour before he managed to peel off its feathers and skin without bleeding. Then, all that was left was the bird's body. She took a big bucket and divided the bird into 2 halves. She threw one half to Wang and stored the other half in the bucket. She looked up at the sky and saw that the sun had come out. Lin Xiao spread the bird's skin on the grass by the side of the road. Then she sat on a rock under a tree and dragged the bucket of bird meat to eat. She tore off the meat piece by piece and chewed it in her mouth. The tenderness and sweetness of the raw meat, as well as the sweet taste of blood, made Lin Xiao unable to stop eating. The zombie dog dragged the other half of the bird meat, which was about the same size as it, to the other side of the grass and gnawed on it with relish. While Lin Xiao was happily eating the meat, on the other side of the road, A group of soldiers went around the West Lake and headed for the uptown area. More than 20 war chariots similar to the one Yang Jianhua had driven before were rumbling over majestically. In a luxurious limousine in the middle, Long Yubai's slender right leg was crossed over his left. He sat lazily on the sofa in the car, holding a glass of red wine in his hand, but his face was looking out the window. Her watery eyes flashed with a faint cold light. Looking at the desolate scene outside the window, he was thinking about Yang Jianhua. Before he came out, he gave the level 6 corpse core to Yang Jianhua. Yang Jianhua thought that he didn't want to give it to him. In fact, he just didn't want to give it to him so easily. He had plenty of level 6 corpse cores in his hand, so why would he care about that one? He just wanted to let Yang Jianhua know that he had to get some benefits from him. It wasn't that easy to make him recognize the price he had to pay. A cold glint flashed across his eyes, and he poured the cup in his hand into his pale lips. Let's find a place to rest first. After drinking a mouthful of red wine, he said in the direction of the first car. Yes. The man in the front passenger seat looked back at him and replied. Not long after, the convoy stopped at a square in front of them. Long Yubai lazily leaned on the sofa and faintly said, I've been sitting in the car for so long. My waist and legs are sore. Alin, come and help me massage it. Yes. The man in the front passenger seat looked back at Long Yubai with a happy expression. Then he looked at the driver, who opened the door and got off. The man in the front passenger seat also got off, but he quickly opened the back door and strode into the carriage Long Yubai was in. After closing the door, he smiled and said, What's wrong, Xiaobai? You've been sitting for so long. Are you lonely? The man was very tall, nearly 1.9 meters. His body was very sturdy, and his explosive muscles propped up his clothes. Saying that, he leaned against Long Yubai and sat down next to him. Then, he took the cup from Long Yubai's hand and put it on the cabinet. Then he touched Long Yubai's waist with one hand. Long Yubai might have drunk some wine. The alcohol made his eyes and face a little red. He turned around and glanced at the man from the corner of his eye, then shifted his gaze away. The man couldn't help but swallow his saliva and stared at him with bright eyes. Then he suddenly reached out and pinched Long Yubai's chin. He pressed his face down and fiercely kissed Long Yubai's lips. He knew that when Long Yubai said to massage him, he actually wanted him to do it and then serve him comfortably. Long Yubai let the man in front of him bite his lips. He slightly narrowed his eyes and seemed to be in a daze. But he actually didn't want to open his eyes to see the man's face. It wasn't that the man was ugly. The man in front of him didn't look ugly. His facial features weren't delicate enough, and he couldn't be considered handsome, but he had a style and his muscles were what Long Yubai liked. He was one of his deputies and also one of the deputy leaders of the Earth Dragon base. Although he wasn't the kind of handsome man he liked, his ability was what he needed. There were many capable men at the end of the world, but a man who was handsome, had a good figure, and was capable. But not many. Long Yubai was obsessed with looks, so he would indulge Yang Jianhua. This time he wanted to go to East China and told Yang Jianhua that he was going to find trouble with the Lin family. But in fact, he heard that the leader of Sea City, Wu Changyue, was a very handsome man. Not only was he the leader, but he was also the leader of the Sea City base. He was a rare thunder ability user and was very powerful. He had long wanted to meet such a man. Soon the car began to shake. The soldiers outside the car ignored it and stared at the periphery as if they hadn't noticed anything. Softer. A soft moaning sound came from the car, and the people around were already used to it. The tremor lasted for 2 hours. When the two finally stopped, Long Yubai got out of the car with his face full of sweat and clothes in disarray. Then, he walked to the bathroom that his subordinates had prepared for him. His men found a clean room for him and prepared a large bucket filled with hot water that was giving off smoke. There was also a set of clothes neatly placed next to it. After Long Yubai entered, he saw that there were 20 to 30 guards standing guard outside the room. This was to prevent someone from suddenly breaking in and disturbing him while he was bathing. After waiting for half an hour, Long Yubai came out feeling refreshed. Then, he returned to the car that had been shaking for 2 hours. Then the convoy quickly retreated and left. Chapter 455. Sitting in the car, Long Yubai asked, "How far are we from Sea City?" Lin Ruifeng, the deputy leader in the passenger seat, turned to him and said, "About 60 kilometers. We should be there in less than 2 hours." If the road was clear, of course, it would not take 2 hours. But now the road was full of broken cars, bricks, and tiles. There were obstacles all along the way, so the speed of the car was much slower. Long Yubai asked lightly, "Is there any news about those people?" Lin Ruifeng said, "There should be news from the people we sent to Sea City. We will know when we get there." Long Yubai nodded and said, "These places in the upper and lower districts of the West Lake district of Hangzhou are all forbidden areas. We should be careful to avoid them. The area of the forest in the West Lake district is very large, and there is a zoo there. It is estimated that the animals there have become mutant beasts and spread out, so we should pay attention to that area." Lin Ruifeng nodded. 2 hours later, they entered the area of Sea City. But they did not enter the Sea City base. Instead, they stopped 4 or 5 kilometers away from the base. Oh, it turns out that Sea City has been quite lively recently. With 1 leader removed, can they control so many people in Haiqing base with only 2 leaders? Long Yubai asked in surprise after listening to the intelligence from the first hand. Lin Ruifeng thought for a while and said, 1 leader, 2 deputy leaders, and dozens of leaders and cadres. A lot of people will fall at one end. But I heard that even if these people are removed, there will not be much turbulence in Sea City. Long Yubai raised another question. What I am more concerned about now is that Lin Feng and the others are delusional about building a new base. Are you sure this news is not a lie? His face was full of sarcasm, and it was obvious that he did not believe the news. Lin Ruifeng said, "I have confirmed this news again and again. It is true. And I heard that Wu Changyue, the leader of Sea City, is also strongly supporting and helping them. I heard that the reward they offered is very attractive." Long Yubai's eyes flashed and he immediately asked with interest, "Oh? So how many people did he recruit from Sea City? What's the reward?" Lin Ruifeng said, "At present, I heard that there are 2 groups of people following them, less than 800 people in total. The reward is rice and flour, and food and accommodation are also provided." Long Yubai's expression froze, then he laughed. "Rice? Where are they going to find so much rice and flour to pay the workers? 1 meal a day including accommodation and food is fine, but 3 meals a day? Are you joking?" Lin Ruifeng thought for a moment before replying, "But this project has Sea City base's leader, Wu Changyue, as the guarantor. He wouldn't lie to everyone in the base, would he? As the leader of a base with over 1 million people, there was no need for him to lie to everyone." Long Yubai's face darkened slightly. Her watery eyes had a cold glint as she stared at him and said, "So you mean that this matter is true? Lin Feng and Yuan Tianqing had asked Sea City base for help? Borrowing manpower? Then what will they give in exchange?" Lin Ruifeng looked at the information in his hands and replied, "Lin Feng and the others indeed seem to have used something to cooperate with Wu Changyue. But Wu Changyue was actually willing to cooperate with them for the first time so readily. This is indeed a little strange. Also, Yuan Tianqing and the others directly treated this matter as a mission and hung it in Sea City's mission hall. First, no one believed this. But after 2 groups of people went, everyone is now wavering in their suspicions." Long Yubai's handsome face was expressionless. His eyes were slightly drooping, and his long eyelashes covered them. No one knew what he was thinking. Lin Ruifeng looked down at the information and didn't notice his expression. Instead, he continued, "The address of Yuan Tianqing and the others' new base has not been found yet. I heard it's quite secret. But someone who knows the inside story said that the place seems to be in the direction of Hangzhou City." Long Yubai raised his head expressionlessly, a strange light flashing in his eyes. "Investigate. My purpose this time was to look for them. No matter what they are doing now, I will not let them have the chance to continue." Lin Ruifeng nodded and said, "Yes. Then what do we do next? Do we enter Sea City to take a look?" He thought that Long Yubai would be willing to enter the base. After all, the living conditions in the base were better than this car in the wilderness. Long Yubai asked, "Did you find any news about the Sea City base's leader?" Lin Ruifeng was slightly startled, then reacted and said, "Oh yes. He's not in Sea City now. He went out to collect supplies. It's already November, and the weather is getting cold. It's going to be winter soon, so he probably has to prepare for the survival of the entire base. Long Yubai nodded and looked at the gloomy sky outside. He said lightly, yes, the weather is starting to get cold. Although there's no change during the day, once the sun goes down, the temperature will plummet. Even if there's not enough food, we have to prepare some clothes and quilts to keep out the cold. These were the things that every base leader was concerned about, but Long Yubai didn't worry about it. Because he didn't care about it, there were several other deputy leaders in the base who would take care of it. But if it wasn't handled well, it didn't matter. If those ordinary people died, then so be it. After all, in this post-apocalyptic world, people without the ability to survive would be eliminated sooner or later. It was better to die early and be free. Lin Ruifeng knew that Long Yubai actually didn't care about the lives of the ordinary people in Earth Dragon Base, so he didn't care about it. On the contrary, in his heart, those who didn't know how to go out and kill zombies and had no ability were just a burden in his eyes. He said yes, that's why Wu Changyue went out with his troops half a month ago. He hasn't come back yet. Long Yubai asked curiously, do you know which direction he went? Lin Ruifeng shook his head and said, their actions have always been confidential. We need to spend some more time to investigate. Long Yubai nodded. Well, I'll give you one more day. By this time tomorrow, I want to know the location of Yuan Tianqing's group and the direction of Wu Chengyue's position. Lin Ruifeng nodded. Yes. Long Yubai raised his head to look at the sky. His eyes, which seemed to be rippling like water, stared straight at something. Lin Ruifeng looked back at him and happened to see his delicate side profile. His sharp chin and neck revealed a beautiful line when he raised his head. He swallowed his saliva and silently watched for a few seconds before forcing himself to look back. A cold light flashed in Lin Ruifeng's eyes when he turned his head. This man exuded an aura that made men's hearts beat all day long. But Lin Ruifeng didn't like this situation to happen. Chapter 456. On the other side, after Lin Xiao and Awang had a good meal of crane meat, Lin Xiao thought of catching food for the king cobra in the space. Lin Xiao put away the scentless feather skin and went to the animal area. Awang followed behind her, licking his lips after eating and drinking to his heart's content. He walked forward slowly. Soon, she arrived at the amphibious reptile territory. At this time there was a big fight. Lin Xiao beckoned to the excited Awang and said, "Come here, don't make trouble. We will just watch the fight here." As she spoke, she leaped onto a nearby tree and climbed up. Looking down from the tree, two huge reptiles were tangled together and attacking each other in a pool that had already dried up. They were a python and a huge crocodile. This python with clear stripes was much bigger than the snake in Lin Xiao's space. After all, this python was a giant among snakes. After the apocalypse, it had become as thick as a water bucket, and its length was at least 50 meters. The black and brown snakeskin reflected the sunlight from time to time. It was trying to entangle the other crocodile with its body, but the crocodile, which was 8 or 9 meters long with its tail, was not easy to deal with. The crocodile's 4 claws, which were as thick as dinosaur legs, were pressing on the python's body. It opened its mouth wide and chased after the giant python's head and neck, trying to bite off the giant python's head in one bite. However, the python was much more flexible than the crocodile. The crocodile's body was very hard and it was very strong. The python wanted to entangle the crocodile and strangle it to death. This was indeed not an easy task. Lin Xiao took out a glass of water from the space and sat on the tree, watching the two big animals kill each other. She was thinking, even if the bucket-thick snake killed the 8 or 9 meters long crocodile, would it be able to swallow such a large prey? Lin Xiao knew that snakes were very greedy and would swallow prey that was several times bigger than themselves. But there were also many who were stuffed to death. Yes, that's right. Especially pythons, they were the greediest. Awang was lying on the other side of a small hill, licking his paws as he watched the two animals fighting below. Lin Xiao sensed the surroundings and found that there were no other animal auras within 5 kilometers. Perhaps the auras of these two were too strong, scaring the others away. Otherwise, he would have been eaten by these two. The strong preyed on the weak. This was a very normal law of nature. He looked at the giant snake's diamond-shaped eyes, which were filled with crazy aggression and ferocious hostility. At a glance, one could tell that it was just a ferocious beast without any spirituality. It only had the instincts of a beast. Lin Xiao was not interested in these wild mutated beasts, but he was more interested in their meat. She watched for a while and analyzed the current combat power and endurance of the two beasts. Soon it was clear who would last longer and who would lose in the end. The giant snake was probably going to lose. Although its movements were nimble, it had used too much strength. Moreover, the crocodile was obviously stronger than the python, but the crocodile was more cunning than the python. The crocodile did not use all its strength. Obviously, it wanted to fight with the python and slowly consume its strength. After Lin Xiao finished her analysis, she was no longer interested in watching. She turned around and jumped down from the tree. After calling A Wang, she continued to walk to the other side. A Wang stood up and followed her. Before leaving, he looked back at the two beasts fighting below. When Lin Xiao walked to the grassland of the animal garden, she saw that the surroundings were desolate. There were no herbivores around. It seemed that the herbivores here had either been hunted by the carnivores or chased away to hide. Lin Xiao stood at the edge of the grassland and sniffed the surrounding. Then she chose a direction and went. Because there came the aura of some kind of animal, and there were so many of them that she did not know what kind of animal it was. When Lin Xiao quietly walked to a forest, she looked at the big rats in front of her speechlessly. Well, she just couldn't get along with the rats. The changes at the end of the world had strengthened the tenacious life force of the rats. They became more rampant. Moreover, rats were omnivores. They ate and gnawed on everything. Alive and dead, soft and hard. They reproduced quickly and liked to live in groups. Furthermore, his temperament was one that feared nothing in the world. Who said that rats were timid? They would not hide from people on the road. How could they be timid? Especially when there was a group of big rats here. Squeak, 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 squeak. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Squeak, squeak, squeak. As soon as she approached the edge of the forest, ear-piercing squeaks of the rats could be heard. Lin Xiao looked at the ground, the trees, and the leaves. There were rats twice the size of cats crawling all over them. Suddenly, she understood why there were two reptiles fighting over there. They were probably trying to take over a rat forest. She did not know why these rats stayed in the forest and did not leave. She did not approach them immediately. Instead, she asked the zombie dog to go over and take a look. A Wang, go over and take a look. Roar, A Wang had been tempted by the rats for a long time, even though he was already full. Even though it had eaten its fill as a hunting dog, it still had its wild instincts. Seeing so many prey in front of it, its wild instincts had long been revealed. Lin Xiao stood at the periphery and continued to sniff. However, there were too many rats here and the smell was too strong. It covered up all the other smells. But even so, Lin Xiao still smelled the presence of other creatures apart from rats. In front of her were tens of thousands of giant rats, crawling everywhere. As soon as the zombie dog approached, the rats in the periphery suddenly went berserk. All of them rushed toward the zombie dog, squeaking. If there were only a few rats, the zombie dog would not be afraid. Of course, it would not be afraid even if there were dozens of them. However, in front of it, it did not know how many of them were crazily rushing over. Even the zombie dog was shocked. It almost turned around and ran away. However, it quickly reacted and jumped back. Then it turned around and spat out flames at the giant rats. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The unimaginable number of rats were immediately burned by the zombie dog's fire. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The unimaginable number of rats were immediately burned by the zombie dog's fire. Then, many of them were burned, causing the rats to stop running forward. They all rolled on the ground in pain. The rats in the apocalypse actually ate zombies. Therefore, when they encountered the zombie dog, they would also rush over to fill their stomachs. As long as it was edible, these rats would not be afraid of anything. They would rush toward their prey without any regard for their lives. Chapter 457. So when it saw the zombie dog coming, it was its prey that came to its doorstep. How could it let it go? Thus, the zombie dog was pounced on by the huge rats like a tide. It was so scared that it jumped up and down, and the fire ability in its mouth continuously burned a large group of rats to death. Then more rats came out of the forest. Lin Xiao silently lit a candle for the zombie dog, and then she jumped down from the tree while invisible. She started from the periphery of the group of rats, and then picked the big ones. She grabbed them and threw them into the forest in her space. Because Lin Xiao could sense the location of the giant snake in her space, she directly threw them into its position. As a result, the king cobra that was sleeping on the tree root suddenly heard a squeaking sound. Hearing this familiar sound, it immediately woke up. Therefore, just as the big snake raised its head, it was hit in the head by a big rat that fell from above. Squeak! A rat the size of an ordinary corgi, after hitting the head of the big snake, rolled to the ground. But this didn't affect its reaction. As soon as it fell to the ground, it quickly turned around and ran. The king cobra was smashed until it was dizzy, but its instinctive reaction was very fast. As soon as it saw something running, it immediately stuck its head out and chased after it. When its whole body was untied and slid out, the snake finally woke up. When it saw clearly that it was a big rat running in front of it, its eyes immediately lit up. A few days ago it was fed by the zombie dog. Although it was only half full, at least it recovered some of its energy and stamina. But at least it had recovered some of its energy and stamina. Now it only took a few seconds to chase a mouse. Squeak! Then the big rat that was running around in fear was immediately bitten by the giant snake. Squeak! Then the big rat that was running around in fear was immediately bitten by the giant snake. Squeak! Then the big rat that was running around in fear was immediately bitten by the giant snake. This rat was swallowed by the king cobra in a few bites. But when it came to the king cobra, eating a mouse that was bigger than its head was just a matter of opening its mouth 2 or 3 times. Just as it finished eating the rat, it swallowed it. Then it saw another rat fall from above and run around. The king cobra didn't say anything and immediately rushed over. Therefore, Lin Xiao would occasionally throw a big rat in to feed the snake, while watching the zombie dog jump around and spit fire at the rats. Perhaps it was because they had sensed the commotion in the rat's nest. The auras of powerful mutant beasts started to appear in all directions. The first ones to arrive were the 2 reptiles that were fighting just now. Because they were originally very close to the forest, they suddenly felt the movement here as they fought. Then they stopped fighting at once, for they could not tell who was better for a while. They might as well check out the situation of their prey first. The surrounding auras were watching from afar and did not approach. This was the territory of the snake and the giant crocodile. If they appeared or approached, they would be warned and attacked. All the animals in this area knew that the giant python and the giant crocodile were neighbors, and they often fought with each other. At this time, Lin Xiao had just thrown a 17 or 18 kilogram rat into the space, and then he jumped to a nearby tree. Then she saw the 2 that were entangled just now, crawling over here one after the other. The one rushing in the front was actually the giant crocodile, followed by the giant python. And the giant python also bit the crocodile's swaying tail from time to time, but it did not bite it. As soon as the 2 of them rushed over, they immediately saw the zombie dog jumping left and right, constantly spitting fire at the group of rats on the ground. Lin Xiao watched as the zombie dog controlled the fire to only kill the rats, so he didn't bother with it anymore. Even if the burned rats rolled around and led the fire to the grass, it would not burn too much. It wouldn't burn too much of an area, and it would extinguish itself very quickly. Seeing that there were other things invading their territory and attacking their captive prey, the 2 overlords immediately became angry. The 2 crawling overlords were enraged and immediately charged towards the zombie dogs. Affected by the smell of the giant snake, the rats that were rushing out of the forest suddenly stopped. Then after pausing for a few seconds, they all ran back. Lin Xiao looked at the big rats that were suddenly scared away, and finally caught a few of them and threw them into the space. Then she appeared and shouted at the zombie dog. "Awang, come back. You can't beat these 2. Awu." The zombie dog knew that the snake and the crocodile that were rushing towards it were several times stronger than it. Mutant beasts did not have any special abilities, but their bodies and strength were multiplied. Therefore, Awang was already no match for the giant python that was dozens of meters long. This was not the king cobra in Lin Xiao's space. This one was much stronger than the previous one. Moreover, there was an even more powerful crocodile. Two of them together. It was better to leave first. Although these rats were not afraid of anything, they were very afraid of this giant python. Because of its large size and its natural enemy, the scales on its body were hard. Even if it lay on the ground for these rats to eat, they would not be able to bite it. Therefore, when the snake appeared, these rats all turned around and ran. Lin Xiao flashed to the side of the zombie dog, grabbed it, and entered the space. Then, the two of them appeared in the forest and looked at the king cobra that had been fed. Lin Xiao looked at the bucket, which was already empty. Lin Xiao fetched another bucket and placed it in front of the king cobra. The black king cobra was so full that it had eaten a stomach full of rats. Its stomach was bulging as if it was pregnant. It lay on the ground lazily. Anyway, even if it was wary of the two in front of it, it was too lazy to move. After Lin Xiao placed the bucket in front of it, she waved at the zombie dog to chase it away. Go, go, go. It is full now. Don't chase it or else it will vomit. Why would it vomit? Wang did not understand. It was already in its stomach, so how could it just swallow it out? Lin Xiao said, I just had a full meal. If you disturb me again, I will feel nauseous. Wang had no choice but to walk out of the forest in confusion. Only then did Lin Xiao look at the giant snake that was coiled up like a small black mountain. Then she flashed out. However, as soon as she went out, she heard a young tiger's roar. Lin Xiao was stunned. Huh? Where did the tiger come from? But then she thought about it and realized that this was a zoo. There must be tigers here. Moreover, it was a Siberian tiger. But when Lin Xiao heard the tiger's roar, why did it sound like the roar of a baby tiger? Was it a baby tiger brought by a big tiger? Was it also here to catch rats to eat? Chapter 458. Lin Xiao was about to leave, but she heard the little tiger's roar as soon as she came out. She looked towards the direction of the sound and saw a little orange cat running towards her from afar. The little tiger was only a few months old. Its entire body was fluffy, and it had a round head and two small ears. A pair of big round eyes flashed with anxiety, panic, helplessness, and other emotions. It hurriedly ran past Lin Xiao in the direction of the rat forest. As if sensing its roar, a weak tiger roar suddenly came from the depths of the rat forest. Roar! Lin Xiao turned her head in surprise and looked towards the forest. Why was there a tiger in the forest? There should be a group of rats there, right? And from the sound of the big tiger, it seemed to be very weak. Roar, 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 roar. Hearing the big tiger's voice, the little tiger immediately roared anxiously. It ran even faster in that direction. Lin Xiao knew that if it ran over like this, it wouldn't be enough to fill the gaps between the two reptiles' teeth. Apart from snakes, there were also rats. These rats didn't seem to be afraid of anything. She wanted to turn around and leave, but she knew that this little fellow would be eaten as a snack in a while. She couldn't bear to do so, so she thought about it and followed it to see the situation. And the big tiger didn't seem to be in a good condition. Otherwise, its voice wouldn't be so weak. The little fellow ran very fast. With a whoosh, it ran through the grass and into the forest. At this time, the two reptiles had already entered the rat forest. Lin Xiao thought about it. The tiger's voice just now also came from inside. Was there another battle going on inside? But strangely, there was no movement inside. If there was a fight, there should be a sound. She followed behind the little tiger, and saw the little tiger boldly running forward. She couldn't help but worry for it. Little fellow, do you know what place you ran into? Roar, roar, roar. The little tiger roared all the way and rushed into the forest. Roar, the big tiger inside roared again. After Lin Xiao ran with the little tiger for 20 minutes, she realized that the forest was really big. She and the little tiger had been running for so long, but they didn't see any signs of reaching the edge. And gradually they got close to the rats again. However, it was very strange that these mice were so scared that they retreated so far away. Lin Xiao jumped onto the tree and sensed the aura in front of him. The rat smell subsided a little, and then other smells came out. Other than the giant python and the giant crocodile, there was another scent that had the same origin as the little tiger. No, it was two. Judging from the smell, Lin Xiao thought that there was only one big tiger inside. But when he smelled it carefully, he realized that something was wrong. That was because the two scents were mixed together. What was going on? Looking at the little tiger's anxious expression, it was not difficult to guess that it was its parents inside. But how could the two of them be deep in the forest and leave the child alone outside? The little tiger ran in and stopped when it saw a large group of mice. Because the rats had also discovered it. They all turned around and stared at it with their green eyes. The little tiger was being stared at by thousands of mice. It was not stupid, so it immediately turned around and ran. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The rats immediately chased after it like a tide. Roar, roar. The little tiger was so scared that it screamed as it ran. Lin Xiao looked at it amusedly. You were not afraid of death just now, why are you afraid now? She knew that this place was filled with the smell of rats. How could this little guy not smell it? She watched as the little tiger was chased by the group of rats, running to the left and then to the right. Although it was still very small, it ran as if it was flying. When Lin Xiao chased it in just now, she realized that it was very fast. Now that it was being chased by a large group of rats, its speed was 2 levels higher than before. Although there were many rats behind it, they could not catch up with its speed at all. Lin Xiao watched for a while and realized that this little guy was actually quite smart. At least as long as it did not encounter the 2 large reptiles just now, it would be fine. Lin Xiao was more curious about the situation of the few inside. She leaped into the air and leaped all the way over the tree. After a while, she followed the smell to the place. When she came inside, she saw that the densely packed big rats were piled up within a few hundred meters. The rats on the ground were stepped on one by one, piling up high. The trees in this area were all full of rats, making the branches rustle under their weight. Squeak, 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 squeak. The continuous sounds of rats made Lin Xiao's head hurt. She kicked away the rats crawling on a tree and stood on it herself. The mouse that was kicked down by her was dumbfounded. It didn't know why it was suddenly kicked down. They looked up and saw nothing. The rats around the spot where Lin Xiao kicked were also startled. But when they looked around, there was nothing there. Then these rats immediately wanted to squeeze into the empty place where Lin Xiao was standing. Suddenly, a wisp of black mist came out from there. Rats had always been very sensitive to danger, so they immediately stopped when they saw the black mist. A few of them who had just come and retreated immediately screamed and turned into nothingness as soon as they came into contact with the black mist. Just like that, they all stayed far away from this place. Lin Xiao stood there and looked forward, finding that there was a big rat mound in front of her. Yes, it was a mound piled up by countless rats. She didn't know why they were piled up like this. But soon Lin Xiao found out why they were piled up like this. Because there was something down there. Lin Xiao didn't know what was down there, but she saw rats falling from above from time to time, and soon rats climbed up again. But Lin Xiao saw what was behind the rats. It was white like an ice cube. Lin Xiao didn't go over, but carefully looked at the periphery. Her position was about 20 meters away from the rat mound, but it didn't affect her eyesight. She looked left and right, but why didn't she see the giant python or the crocodile? Didn't she smell their scent just now? Why did they run away now? Roar, roar, roar. The little tiger shouted outside, unable to stop being chased by a large group of rats. It couldn't run in again, so it began to panic again. Roar. At this time, an adult tiger suddenly roared from under the rat mound. Lin Xiao was stunned. Then she stared there in surprise. Huh, there was a tiger below. Looking at the rat mound that was as big as a tomb, it turned out that there was a tiger below it. Roar, roar. When the little tiger heard its roar, it immediately responded. However, Lin Xiao couldn't understand what it was. There was no other way, she could only understand the sound of zombies. Chapter 459. At this moment, all the rats in the area scattered in panic. Maybe it was because there were more of them, but the speed at which they scattered slowed down. After a while, all of them ran away. Tens of thousands of rats that were bigger than cats ran away. Immediately, the thing under the pile of rats was revealed. Sure enough, it was a huge pile of ice. She could also vaguely see a black striped orange animal lying under the pile of ice. Could still move, but only its front half. Its back half seemed to be unable to move. It seemed that there was a space within the pile of ice, and it was just trapped inside. Lin Xiao knew why the rats ran because after a while, she saw the huge python slither in. It slid in front of the big pile of ice, then raised its head high and stared at the big tiger inside the ice pile. That's right, there were two big tigers inside. From Lin Xiao's point of view, she could only see one because the other was blocked. Lin Xiao jumped over and saw the other one when she got closer. The other one was lying inside, motionless. Only the other one was using its front paws to support its body, trying to get up. But when it saw the giant serpent approaching, it immediately stopped moving. It also stared at it closely, letting out a warning growl like a wild beast. Roar! Lin Xiao stood on a tree less than 2 meters away from the pile of ice and looked at the big tiger below. She could feel that the one that was lying motionless was no longer breathing. In other words, it was dead. But why did this one want to stay by his side? But looking at the one that was still alive, its condition was not much better. When she got closer, Lin Xiao saw that the one that was still alive had a large patch of blood on its waist. It was obviously heavily injured. It was trying to stand up, but its hind legs could not move. Its waist bone was probably broken. Lin Xiao looked at the two big tigers. They were not big. In this apocalyptic world full of giant mutated beasts, they were really not big. Because they were only half the size of the original adult Siberian tigers, they probably weighed about 700 to 800 kilograms. The huge snake just quietly stared at her from outside the pile of ice, spitting out its tongue from time to time. Lin Xiao looked around. Where did the crocodile go? At this moment, the little tiger outside suddenly screamed. Roar! Hearing the little tiger's childish scream, the tiger under the ice was no longer calm. It abruptly propped itself up, but its back was still dragging on the ground. Then, he roared weakly in the direction of the little tiger. Roar! After roaring, it fell to the ground powerlessly. But it immediately began to prop itself up again. Lin Xiao turned her head to look outside. She sensed that the aura of the little tiger had weakened. It looked like it was injured, and its smell was mixed with that of the crocodile. It was over. The little guy had obviously fallen into the hands of the giant crocodile. But since he wasn't dead, did that mean he wasn't eaten by the crocodile? Soon there was movement from the other side. The giant crocodile's powerful limbs stomped on the ground step by step, creating a series of tremors. It was slowly walking towards them. Roar! The big tiger in the ice mountain roared again. At this time, perhaps sensing the approach of the giant crocodile, the giant python also moved. It raised its neck high, then suddenly opened its mouth and bit down on the ice mountain where the big tiger was. Gotcha! The giant python's sharp teeth bit the ice and immediately broke a small piece of ice. Ice shards splashed everywhere. The big tiger inside was immediately shocked. It bared its teeth and glared at the giant python. Roar! After the first bite, the giant python didn't stop. Instead, it continued to bite the ice mountain with its neck. Rather than saying it was biting, it would be better to say that it was hitting the ice mountain. It swung its long neck and used its teeth to hit the ice mountain from above. Then it bit down hard. Moreover, the python's teeth weren't like poisonous snakes that only had 2 teeth. It had 4 rows of teeth. But the only thing that could be used to attack was the 2 rows of sharp teeth on the outside. Therefore, Lin Xiao watched as countless ice shards flew out when it bit down. Soon, the giant crocodile slowly appeared. It easily held a dying little tiger in its mouth and slowly approached them. As it got closer, the giant python immediately stopped attacking the big tiger's ice mountain. It quickly swam to the other side and pulled a safe distance away from the giant crocodile. Thus, the two of them stood opposite each other on both sides of the big tiger. Roar! Seeing the little tiger in the giant crocodile's mouth, the big tiger inside the ice mountain immediately roared. It suddenly struggled to stand up, but the posture of its hind legs was a little strange. Because of its loud roar, the ice barrier around it suddenly cracked open. A few seconds later, it broke into pieces on the ground, revealing the 2 tiger bodies inside. Of course, one of them had already become a cold corpse. The big tiger climbed up with some kind of willpower. It opened its mouth and fiercely sprayed an ice mist at the giant crocodile. The ice mist shot at the giant crocodile that was already 4 or 5 meters away, but it only hit the front leg of the giant crocodile. The giant crocodile that was suddenly hit in the front leg stopped. When it saw that the big tiger's ice mountain had broken, it suddenly shook its head and threw the little tiger up slightly. Then it opened its mouth to catch the little tiger. Roar, seeing its action, the big tiger anxiously and angrily roared at it, but it couldn't continue to attack anymore. After this roar, its body that had just stood up fell to the ground with a thud. It watched helplessly as the little tiger fell into the giant crocodile's mouth. When the little tiger fell, the giant crocodile closed its mouth. But after it closed its mouth, it was stunned. Then it suddenly opened its mouth again, and its tongue swept around. The little tiger that it thought would fall into its mouth was now gone. Roar! The big tiger roared at the giant crocodile, and then its whole body suddenly began to freeze. His soft orange fur had turned into ice needles, and his tail had also turned into ice. The tiger's eyes, mouth, and teeth all turned into ice sculptures. Lin Xiao didn't know why the ice tiger didn't use this skill before. It had to wait until its child was killed before it was willing to use it. Could it be that this skill could only be used once? But it was already too late to use it now. If it had used it just now, it might have been able to save the little tiger in time. She took a look at the space and suddenly rushed up to snatch the little tiger from the crocodile's mouth. At this moment it was soaked in a bucket. This was the bucket that the king cobra used to drink water from. At this moment, a little tiger suddenly fell into the bucket. At this moment, it was looking at the little tiger in the water with a confused expression. Huh, was this for it to eat? So when it was about to bite the little tiger out of the bucket and swallow it, Lin Xiao suddenly appeared and reached out to grab the whole bucket. Wait, you can't eat this. Chapter 460. The snake, who was about to take a bite of the snack, looked at Lin Xiao blankly as she walked away with the bucket. This time it was not going to let it go. It swung its body and rushed over. She could take away the food, but not the bucket of water. Leave the water for this snake. Lin Xiao took the bucket away while paying attention to the fight outside. The big black snake rushed in front of her and blocked her way with a turn. It didn't dare to attack Lin Xiao because it couldn't beat her. What if the two-legged monster killed it after it attacked Lin Xiao? Therefore, although the big black snake rushed in front of Lin Xiao aggressively, it didn't dare to do anything to her. Just blocked her. If she went left, it would block her left, and if she went right, it would block her right. Lin Xiao didn't know what it wanted to do. Seeing that it was stopping her from leaving, Lin Xiao was confused. He had no choice but to scoop the baby tiger out of the water and put the bucket on the ground with it in his arms. Then she took a few steps back and put a distance of 2 meters between her and the bucket. She wanted to see if the snake was going to block the bucket or the baby tiger in her hand. In the end, she saw the big snake crawling towards the bucket that had been dyed red. Then it sniffed the bucket left and right. Suddenly, it pressed its head against the bucket and pushed it to the side. Puffed, puffed. The bucket was overturned and all the water in it poured out. Lin Xiao paid attention to its movements while watching the fight outside. The frozen tiger was now struggling with the giant crocodile. Perhaps it was because of the addition of the ice, it regained its mobility. At this time it jumped up agilely and pounced towards the giant crocodile. Then it spat out a row of ice blades at the giant crocodile in mid-air. Countless ice blades that were 2 fingers wide and 20 centimeters long shot towards the giant crocodile's body. However, the giant crocodile had thick skin and flesh. Hundreds of ice blades hit its body, but they were all broken into pieces. They didn't hurt it at all. Seeing that its attack was useless, the ice tiger roared at it angrily. Roar! The giant crocodile shook its feet and a layer of ice fell off its frozen forelimbs. Lin Xiao didn't want to help either side. But when she subconsciously saved the little tiger, she sighed in her heart. After wrapping the little tiger in a piece of clothing that no one was wearing, she placed it on the carpet in the small building. Then he took a glass of water and poured it into its mouth. After letting it drink the water, Lin Xiao flashed out of the space. She knew that as long as she put the little tiger in the building, the giant snake would not come in. After Lin Xiao left, Cho Lily came downstairs. She wanted to see what Lin Xiao was doing, but she saw a dying tiger cub lying on the carpet. Lin Xiao disappeared again. After Lin Xiao came out, he glanced at the giant python that was taking advantage of the fight between the ice tiger and the giant crocodile to sneak closer to the tiger corpse. She felt a little strange. Snakes never ate dead things, so why would they crawl towards the dead tiger? As if sensing the movement of the giant python, the ice tiger that was attacking the giant crocodile suddenly turned around and roared in the direction of the giant python. Roar, as it roared, it swept away the giant crocodile and then pounced towards the giant python. It successfully stopped the giant python from approaching. Lin Xiao looked at its actions strangely. The ice tiger was actually guarding the tiger corpse. She wondered what the relationship between the two tigers was. The giant python completely ignored the ice tiger's attack, because its skin was also very hard. The ice blade spat out by the ice tiger had no effect on it. Roar! The ice tiger seemed to have gone crazy. It roared and suddenly spat out a pile of ice mist at the giant python. The ice mist spread quickly because the giant python was already very close to the ice tiger, so it was immediately covered by the ice mist. Soon, the giant python's body began to freeze. The reticulated snakeskin turned into ice skin. The ice tiger immediately rushed over and pounced on the temporarily frozen giant python. Its two front claws slapped the frozen body of the giant python. Gotcha! The place that was hit by the ice tiger's claws immediately shattered. The giant python's lower body was not frozen. At this time it was vigorously twisting its lower body, and the snake's tail was swinging. The ice tiger obviously hated it to the core. After patting it once, it continued to slap it repeatedly. Its two tiger paws slapped several holes on the frozen body of the giant python. Perhaps it was frozen. After the giant python's meat was smashed, flesh and blood could be seen inside, but no blood flowed out. After a series of slaps, the ice tiger would bite the giant python from time to time. With a bite, another piece of broken meat came off. At this moment, a big mouth suddenly stretched out from the side and bit towards the ice tiger at an extremely fast speed. The ice tiger reacted quickly and jumped to the side, avoiding the giant crocodile. After the giant crocodile saw the ice tiger dodge, it was not in a hurry to chase after it. Instead, it suddenly crawled towards the giant python. It crawled to the side of the giant python, raised one of its claws, and slapped the giant python's body. Its action was actually the same as the ice tiger's, but the effect was different. With a few bangs, the giant python's upper body, including its neck, was broken by the giant crocodile. It should be said that it was broken. Perhaps the giant crocodile was not interested in the dead tiger's corpse. After slapping the giant python's upper body, it began to move towards its lower body. Then it began to bite the part that was not frozen. After this bite, it used its two front claws to press down on the frozen part of the giant python. It used its mouth to bite the back part, but after a few tries it realized that it was a little difficult. So it bit the snake's body and slowly dragged it away, leaving behind the ice tiger that was helpless against the giant crocodile. Seeing that one of the three had died and another had left, Lin Xiao silently looked at the ice tiger that was guarding the tiger's corpse. Feeling that the surrounding threat no longer existed, the ice tiger still silently maintained its current appearance, as if it was not going to change back. At this moment Lin Xiao sighed. She wanted to help, but looking at the changes in the situation, her help was no longer needed. Now she could only return the baby tiger to the big tiger. Lin Xiao entered the space in a flash and saw Qiu Lily squatting beside the wet baby tiger and looking at it. Chapter 461. 461. Seeing that Lin Xiao was going out with the baby tiger, Qiu Lily hurriedly asked, Are you going out with it? Lin Xiao nodded and said, Yeah, I'm going to give it back to its parents. It's like this now. You're going to show up in front of its parents with it. Won't they attack you? I won't let it hurt me, said Lin Xiao. Don't worry. Don't worry. It was the first time for her to meet a superpowered mutated beast. The ones she had met before didn't have superpowers. Superpowered mutated beasts were rare, very rare. Lin Xiao showed up in front of the ice tiger with the unconscious baby tiger. The ice tiger was startled by Lin Xiao's sudden appearance. It was no stranger to human beings. Before the apocalypse, all of them were raised by human beings. However, seeing the baby tiger in Lin Xiao's hands, the ice tiger couldn't stay calm anymore. Roar! It immediately lowered its head and popped its eyes as it roared at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao slowly put the baby tiger on the ground, then raised both hands and slowly made a few steps backward. After that, she abruptly leaped onto a tree nearby and landed on it. As Lin Xiao stepped back, the ice tiger raised its head and glanced at her with confusion. However, it didn't relax its vigilance. It walked toward the baby tiger step by step. It couldn't believe its own eyes. Just now, it saw its baby being swallowed by the four-legged fish. How could it show up now? And it was still alive. The ice tiger slowly approached the baby tiger and lowered its head to sniff at the baby tiger's body. He felt that there was another very pleasant smell mixed in with the familiar smell. Judging by the nice scent, the ice tiger figured out that it was a kind of energy that could heal wounds. It raised its claws and gently pulled the baby tiger's body, then carefully sniffed at its scent. Then it raised its head and glanced at Lin Xiao with confusion. It was raised by human beings all the time, so it wasn't hostile to Lin Xiao. After confirming that its baby was still alive, it relaxed its attitude toward Lin Xiao a little. Lin Xiao silently observed the ice tiger and found that it didn't give up on the baby tiger even though it was injured. So she sighed with relief. For some animals, if their children were too weak, their mothers would give them up. Take the strong child and leave. The ice tiger sniffed around the baby tiger's body for quite a while, then turned back to look at the dead tiger which was lying on the ground without moving. After that, it turned back to look at Lin Xiao who was on the tree. Just like that, it looked back and forth 3 times. He looked at the tiger cub, then at the tiger corpse and finally at Lin Xiao. In the end, as if it had made some kind of agreement, it used its mouth to bite the clothes under the little tiger, and then lowered its head to prevent the little tiger from rolling out of the clothes. The ice tiger bit a corner of Lin Xiao's shirt and slowly dragged her toward Lin Xiao. He didn't let go of Lin Xiao until he was under the tree. After putting down the baby tiger, the ice tiger raised its head to look at Lin Xiao for a few seconds. Then he lowered his head and turned around. He turned around and walked towards the tiger corpse. After walking a few steps, it would turn back to look at the little tiger. By the time it reached the tiger corpse, it had turned its head back 3 times. Lin Xiao confusedly looked at the ice tiger who had dragged the baby tiger to her tree, then at the ice tiger who had walked to the dead tiger. What was the meaning of this? In fact, in the ice tiger's mind, it knew that human beings would save their lives. Humans would save its child because the previous keepers had saved a critically ill tiger cub before. The ice tiger walked back to the corpse of the tiger and laid down next to it. Then it turned its head toward the little tiger and lied on the ground. Before long, the ice on its body seemed to be contagious as it froze the other dead tiger as well. After that, Lin Xiao saw the ice tiger turn into 2. After that, one dead body turned into 2. After lying down, the ice tiger sent the last bit of its energy to the dead tiger. At the same time, its life force dropped sharply and then disappeared. Lin Xiao leaped off the tree and held the little tiger in her arms. She didn't walk toward the 2 dead tigers, but glanced at them, then turned and left. It seemed that the dead tiger had consumed the last bit of its energy and life in order to become the ice tiger's power. Did it need to preserve its own bodies and those of its friends before it died? Lin Xiao didn't know how long the ice energy would last, but that had nothing to do with her anymore. She looked at the lively little tiger that had turned into such a pitiful state. She had no choice but to carry it and leave. At least it wouldn't die in her hands. She turned and walked out of the woods. Those giant rats which had been everywhere earlier were all gone by now. She had no idea where they had gone. Lin Xiao fed the king cobra and took a trip to the zoo. She figured that it was time for her to continue her journey. She walked out of the zoo and let the car out. After that, she put the baby tiger in the front seat, then sat into the driver's seat and prepared to drive toward the south. While driving, she kept an eye on the baby tiger. After a couple of hours of driving, the little tiger finally woke up slightly. It looked around confusedly and saw Lin Xiao, who was a stranger to it. It gave a start and tried to jump up. However, once it moved, its wounds ached. Oh! The little tiger howled in pain. Lin Xiao turned and glanced at it. The little thing recovered pretty quickly. She thought that it wouldn't wake up until nighttime. However, it wouldn't be able to see its parents in the future. It would have to follow her. Lin Xiao sighed. She had one more carnivorous animal now. Thankfully, she was still able to catch food for them. She could afford to feed them. The little tiger howled in pain but didn't dare to move. Once it moved, it would feel pain. So it had no choice but to stay where it was. However, it still shook its fluffy head and looked around. It stared at Lin Xiao for quite a while. Lin Xiao glanced at it. The little thing was so weak before it woke up. But now it was so energetic. It seemed that her water energy was getting more and more effective. Oh, it found that even though it was lying still, it still felt waves of pain. The little tiger was restless again. Lin Xiao looked at it and had no choice but to park the car aside. After that, she took out a glass of water from her space and started feeding it. It was, of course, not easy to feed the little tiger after it woke up. The little thing didn't cooperate, so Lin Xiao spent quite a while to feed it a glass of water. She even spilled a lot of water on the front seat. The little tiger had been struggling while scratching Lin Xiao from time to time. It just wouldn't drink the water that Lin Xiao gave it. Lin Xiao even wanted to strangle it to death. Why would she feed it? Chapter 462. She went out of Hangzhou without a hitch. Although her breath was always open, she didn't hide it. She also caught a few level 5 zombie leaders and a dozen level 4 zombies on the way. Soon the number of zombies in her space grew a lot more. And with Cho Lily suppressing them, the new zombies didn't dare to make trouble. At night, Lin Xiao had entered the border of Jiangxi, in Yushan County. She stopped the car and put it into her space. She flashed and went in. After going in, Lin Xiao took the little tiger out. Ow ow, after an afternoon, the little fellow had recovered a lot of energy. Although it couldn't move, its claws didn't stop scratching people. After entering the small building, Lin Xiao put it on the ground. The little tiger's fur was already dry. It was fluffy and messy, but its 2 round eyes were still very lively. As long as Lin Xiao approached it, it would immediately bare its teeth and scratch with its claws. Seeing it like this, Cho Lily was surprised and said, "What? It recovered so fast? When I saw it at noon, it was clearly dying." Lin Xiao nodded and said, "Yes, it's already so energetic after waking up." Cho Lily asked, "Aren't you going to send it back to its parents? Why did you bring it here?" Lin Xiao said, "Its parents are both dead." Cho Lily was stunned and then said, "Oh, I see." Lin Xiao pressed down the little tiger that was crawling on the carpet and said to it, "Don't move, your injury hasn't healed yet. Just stay there." Ow! The little tiger that wanted to stand up was pressed down again and immediately struggled. Cho Lily said, "Then why don't you just put it in an empty room? Let it struggle on its own, you can't hold it down all the time anyway. And then how did you drive outside like this?" Lin Xiao said helplessly, "I threw it on the back seat and let it struggle on its own. In the end, the seat was bitten and scratched." As she spoke, she grabbed the little tiger and stood up. Then she went upstairs and found an unoccupied room on the 2nd floor. After putting the little tiger in, he closed the door and left it alone. After seeing Lin Xiao come down, Cho Lily asked, "Did you not give it anything to eat? Otherwise, why would it keep barking?" Lin Xiao said, "I caught a rabbit for it in the afternoon and gave it all to it. I didn't even get a piece," she said as she walked out, because she still had to deal with the newly caught zombies. After leaving the small building, Lin Xiao turned in the direction of the space. From the first batch of level 4 zombies, other than the 3 that were left at the upper city to help with farming, there were still 14 of them left. In the second large space, there were a few zombie leaders squatting inside. The 5 zombie leaders were squatting on the ground when they saw Lin Xiao and Cho Lily coming in. All of them retreated in fear. "Don't move. What are you retreating for? Stand up." Lin Xiao shouted at them sternly. The 5 zombie leaders immediately stood up and carefully stood in front of Lin Xiao. However, they still couldn't help but take a few steps back. One of them took a step back and the other followed suit. In the end, everyone took a few steps back together. Lin Xiao looked at them coldly and said, "What are you afraid of? If I want to kill you, do I need to catch you? But if you don't listen, then I will really kill you." Think about it carefully. These zombies were all wild zombies. Although Lin Xiao and Qiu Lily could use their levels to suppress them, that was only if they appeared. However, that was only when they showed up. If she wanted them to do things for her without causing any trouble, she would not be able to do so. She still needed to train them well. First, she needed to let them know how to listen to orders and understand the rules. These zombie leaders were very afraid of Lin Xiao and Qiu Lily's aura, so when they saw them coming, they all instinctively wanted to run away. They didn't know that Lin Xiao had chosen them today. After 30 to 50 years, they escaped the fate of being wiped out by humans. Lin Xiao didn't force them. She just stood at the door and said, "Listen to my instructions. Don't run around in here. Otherwise, I won't be polite to you. Also, you are not allowed to fight. I'm telling you, if I find you fighting, you can try." After saying that, she suddenly waved her hand. Immediately, a wisp of black fog floated out. Then it began to fly above the zombie leaders and slowly grew bigger. Very soon it turned into the shape of a dragon. Seeing this black fog, all the zombie leaders were shocked. This time they quickly retreated, and then tightly lay on the wall of the space. The wall of space was actually a mass of white mist, and the place where the white mist appeared. Where the white fog appeared, it couldn't pass through. Lin Xiao waved her hand and took back her ability. Then she turned around and went into the small space next door. At this time, Zhou Shihui was still sitting in the office in Haiqing base. Yan Fengyu stood in front of his desk and said, "Long Yubai has been outside the base for the whole afternoon, but he didn't come to say hello. Is it really good to let him stay outside like this?" Now there was a rule between every base. If the regular army of a base wanted to pass in front of or beside another base, they had to first say hello. Otherwise, the local base would think that the intention of bringing the army over was unclear and could be expelled. Just like in the past, our country, our territory, the military forces of other countries couldn't invade at will. So this time, it was not a big deal that Long Yubai brought a large number of troops to stay 5 or 6 kilometers away from their base. But they didn't come to say hello, which was a bit inappropriate. Although Haiqing base was small, now the whole city was Haiqing base's territory. So the other troops entering the city was already considered an invasion. Zhou Shihui calmly looked down at the document and said, "Don't worry. If they don't send someone to greet us tomorrow, if they still don't send someone to say hello tomorrow, then we can only send someone out to warn them." Yan Fengyu was very dissatisfied with Long Yubai's behavior and said, "Humph, what is a small earth dragon base? How dare they come to our side? What do they want?" Zhou Shihui smiled and looked up at her. He said, "You care about him that much? Although his base isn't big, he has connections with the leaders of several other bases. That's different." Yan Fengyu actually hated this kind of people who had no ability and could only use that kind of means to confuse people. For example, she used to be very disdainful of Lu Tianyu. But although she didn't like this woman, as long as she didn't provoke her, she wouldn't do anything to Lu Tianyu. But she had heard what kind of person the leader of Earth Dragon Base was, so naturally she didn't have a good opinion of him. Chapter 463. Long Yubai, whom Yan Fengyu disliked, was standing on the roof of a car with Lin Ruifeng standing behind him. Lin Ruifeng said to him, "Yuan Tianxing and the others are indeed heading towards Hangzhou. I heard that they're still in Hangzhou. Also, Wu Chengyue seems to be heading in that direction this time, but I'm not sure if he's also in Hangzhou." Long Yubai's eyes flashed. He crossed his arms in front of his chest with one hand and rubbed his chin with the other. He said, "They're all heading in that direction? We came from that direction too. Seems like we've missed them. In that case, let's go back." As he spoke, he jumped out of the car and walked to his RV. "Bring me the map of Zhejiang province." "Yes, sir." A soldier beside him replied and quickly turned to get the map. Lin Ruifeng also jumped out and walked behind him. Soon, the soldier came back with a map and handed it to Long Yubai. Long Yubai took the map and walked into his car. After turning on the lights, he spread out the map on his lap. He looked at Hangzhou and Jiaxing. Hangzhou is so big. It won't be easy to find them. Did anyone go to their base and then come out of it? He asked as he looked at the map. Lin Ruifeng shook his head. Not yet. But I heard that they're still recruiting workers in High City, and will send them over again. It's just that we don't know the exact time they'll send them over. Long Yubai thought for a moment and asked, then are we just going to wait here? Lin Ruifeng said, maybe we can go in the direction of Hangzhou, and send out all the intelligence teams to investigate the situation. Also, we're already in High City's territory. We can't stay for too long. We can leave another team here to ambush Yuan Tianxing and the others. We can follow them the next time they come back to pick up the workers. Long Yubai nodded and said, all right, let's do as you say. Since we can't stay here for too long, let's leave High City first. Lin Ruifeng nodded and asked, now? Long Yubai said, now? Didn't you say that we can't stay in someone else's territory for too long? Don't tell me we have to wait for them to come tomorrow? I'll go and organize the team immediately, Lin Ruifeng said as he turned and got out of the car. After Long Yubai left the Netherworld King's base, Yang Jianhua sat cross-legged on his bed and absorbed a corpse core. The corpse core's energy was continuously channeled into his palm, and into his body through his palm. A large amount of energy circulated in his body and finally gathered in his brain. He had been absorbing energy here for 3 days and was now at the most critical moment. Sure enough, after an hour, Yang Jianhua's body suddenly trembled. The veins on his face suddenly bulged, and his handsome features suddenly became ferocious. A wave of energy rippled out from his body, and the whole room shook as if there was an earthquake. All the furniture in the room shook at the same time. Then the energy wave shrank back into Yang Jianhua's body. The ferocious expression on Yang Jianhua's face returned to normal. He opened his long and narrow eyes, and a glint flashed across them. He got up from the bed and stood up straight. He closed his eyes and loosened his hands. After sensing the energy in his body, he smiled slightly. His eyebrows were raised, and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up. Finally, he had reached the 7th rank. He had finally entered the realm of the real strong. Ha 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 ha. This way, he wouldn't have to be humble in front of Long Yubai in the future. Yang Jianhua took a deep breath and walked out of the room. Go and call Lu Yu to my study. After walking out of the door, Yang Jianhua ordered the guards at the door. Yes. One of the 2 guards at the door immediately turned around and left. Yang Jianhua turned and walked toward his office, and the other soldier followed behind him. He went down to the 2nd floor and walked into the study. The soldier naturally waited outside the door. Not long after, a man and the soldier that Yang Jianhua had just called came up together. Seeing that there was someone guarding the door of Yang Jianhua's study, he immediately knew that Yang Jianhua was already inside. Lu Yu immediately walked over and stood outside the door and knocked. Come in. Yang Jianhua's voice came from inside. Lu Yu twisted the handle of the door and pushed the door open. Yang Jianhua was sitting at his desk, and there were many lists of information in front of him. At this time, he was holding a list in his hand. After Lu Yu came in, he closed the door, then walked to Yang Jianhua's desk and asked, Leader, have you broken through? Yang Jianhua didn't look up at him, but just responded faintly. Lu Yu was his most trusted subordinate, so he didn't want to hide it from him. Yang Jianhua didn't intend to hide it from him. Anyway, he would soon let everyone know that he was now a 7th rank expert. Have you checked all the items? How many supplies did Long Yubai take? He looked up at Lu Yu and asked. Lu Yu nodded and walked up to him and rummaged through his desk. Then he pulled out a stack of paper and handed it to him. These are the things he took. Yang Jianhua took it and opened it in his hand to look at it carefully. Lu Yu continued to take several other lists on the table and put them in front of him. These are the list of people who are still at the base, as well as their relatives and so on. These are the people who were sent to Earth Dragon Base by Long Yubai. Most of them are young and healthy men and women. There are about 5,000 of them. The more Yang Jianhua looked, the more his face sank. He said coldly, he brought all these precious energy supplies to Earth Dragon. It seems that he wanted to destroy this place for a long time. It doesn't matter. When I get to Earth Dragon, I will take back everything that belongs to me. Long Yubai can forget about suppressing me to do things for him. Then this place, are we really going to destroy it? What about the people here? Right now, the old, the weak, the sick, and the disabled in the base, even if we deliberately let them die, there are still more than 30,000 people alive. Including the soldiers and other ability users, there are more than 60,000 people. What should we do with these people? Didn't Long Yubai say to kill all those useless burdens? Then just kill them. If they want to hate, let them hate Long Yubai. Try to put the families of the soldiers last. Don't kill them first. Without them, how can we restrain the soldiers? Yang Jianhua sneered and said while looking at the list in his hand. Then in this case, will Long Yubai have a problem with you? Lu Yu asked with a frown. Of course he will. There are so many people and so many mouths. Do you think he will be willing to consume his food? Yang Jianhua sneered. Chapter 464. Hearing Yang Jianhua say that those old, weak, sick and disabled people should be killed, Lu Yu's face showed no expression. Like Yang Jianhua, he had no relatives in this post-apocalyptic world. Those who have relatives, if they are not strong enough, will end up like this. It can only be said that they are unlucky. Why did they choose this base to live? Long Yubai has always been a very stingy person. Many people in his own base will starve to death. Not to mention these people in the enemy's base, it has nothing to do with him. Why should he give more food to feed them? But if we do it directly, it may cause dissatisfaction among most of the soldiers in the army. And there are those ability users, they will not be obedient to you, leader. Lu Yu thought about it and said, there is no need to do it so quickly anyway. They have not eaten for many days now. They won't last long. Yang Jianhua said faintly. After those who did not escape were controlled, they were given very little food. Usually when 10 people are locked together, they will only put food in for 2 people and then let them fight for it. After a few months, most of them starved to death. There was no need for Yang Jianhua to send people to do it. When Lu Yu heard this, he nodded in understanding. He also guessed that Yang Jianhua would say this. Then when do we leave for Earth Dragon Base? Lu Yu thought about it and asked again. Yang Jianhua did not say anything. He just looked at the list of information in front of him. After a while he said, don't worry, he is going to Sea City now. He won't be back so soon. You first bring out the families of the soldiers in this base and then control them. Pay attention, let these people die. Although they have no ability, they are still useful. Without them, it will be difficult to control the tens of thousands of soldiers. Okay, I will do it in a moment. Lu Yu responded. By the way, haven't the rats outside the base been cleaned up? We must get rid of them quickly. Don't let them have a chance to appear and ruin our plan. Yang Jianhua suddenly thought of something and said to Lu Yu, most of them have been cleaned up, but there is still a group of people who are very difficult to deal with. They are very good at hiding. They have been hiding from time to time. We can't lock their whereabouts. Speaking of the former Lin Chao party outside the base, Lu Yu also had a headache. Oh, who are these people? Do you know his identity? Yang Jianhua asked. Lu Yu said it's Duan Wan, Li Hongsheng, and a few others from Lin Chao's personal guards. They are now leading a motley crew. Although they are not very strong, they are very good at hiding like mice. Duan Wan? This woman is not dead yet. Are they still keeping an eye on this broken base? Yang Jianhua snorted coldly. Lu Yu nodded. Yes, she and Li Hongsheng gathered the other ability users and soldiers who escaped. They've been roaming around the outskirts of this base. I wonder what they're up to. Yang Jianhua looked at him, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. If you don't know what they're doing, do you still let them stay outside? Lu Yu was slightly stunned and said in a panic, no. We have been tracking their tracks, but these people are too cunning. Every time we got the news and rushed over, they would know in advance and run away. Every time? Are you sure it's not a spy on your side? Yang Jianhua asked faintly. Lu Yu said it's also possible. Yang Jianhua waved his hand at him at this time and said, okay, hurry up and get rid of them. They are staring here and not leaving. They must have some intentions. Yes. Lu Yu immediately turned and left. While Yang Jianhua was carrying Long Yubai on his back, Lin Chao had almost arrived the next day. After driving through Guangzhou City, she went all the way to Huyuan City. However, it was still 2 or 3 hours' drive from Hui City, where the Netherworld King's base was located. The location of the Netherworld King's base was in a county of Hui City. It was not in the urban area, but in Huidong County near the sea. After entering the county, Lin Xiao put away the car and jumped to the roof alone. After carefully smelling the air, she suddenly sneaked in a direction. There was a school, just a primary school. The tables and chairs in the classroom were also overturned, and most of the books and textbooks inside were scattered on the ground. The walls, doors, windows, and many other places in the classroom were stained with dried blood. At this time, in one of the classrooms, a strong smell of blood spread out. Lin Xiao came because of this strong smell of blood. It might be because she was too far from the human base, so she didn't smell so much blood. Now that she suddenly smelled this blood, her intuition told her that there must be a fierce corpse here. As long as she saw a fierce corpse that was eating people, Lin Xiao would not let it go. She came to the gate of the primary school, looked at the surrounding desolate environment, and then lifted her feet to walk in. Along the school path that was covered with weeds, she walked towards the 3-story teaching building. Soon she arrived at the bottom of the building. At this point, the stench from the 3rd floor became even thicker. Lin Xiao couldn't help but cover her nose with her hands. Although she didn't need to breathe, she could smell the smell, and her nose was very sensitive. The smell of blood directly rushed from the nose to the brain. Lin Xiao only felt a little dizzy from the smell. After walking up the stairs, she walked towards the smell of blood. The strong smell of blood had the aura of a level 5 zombie leader, and it also had a very fierce and vicious aura. Along the way, she looked at the middle of the stairs. There were old and new blood marks. Obviously, there was a living thing that was dragged on the ground. As for what it was, whether it was a human or an animal, of course Lin Xiao wouldn't guess because she could directly smell that it was human blood. Even if it was dry, it was still the smell of human blood. She stepped on the places that were not dragged by blood, and walked up while observing the blood marks. The blood marks had been dragged in the same place many times, and had already formed a blood path. Who knew how many times the blood had been dragged here? And after the blood was dried up, it was smeared with new blood. So this blood path had already piled up into a thick blood stain. After Lin Xiao walked along the blood path to the 3rd floor, she saw that the blood path extended to a classroom. She walked over and looked at the half-closed door, and on the top of the door frame hung a rusty class number. 5th grade class 3. Lin Xiao didn't go in but walked to the window and looked inside. With one look, Lin Xiao frowned. Because the tables in the classroom were arranged neatly, every table and every chair was in their original position, not like other classrooms that were messed up. But what made Lin Xiao frown was not the neatly arranged tables and chairs, but the corpses that were placed on the tables. Chapter 465. The classroom wasn't big, but there were more than 30 tables for 2 people. In the past, a main class would probably have 50 or 60 people. But now there was a corpse on each of these 2-person tables. The corpses on the podium had been there for the longest time, and then one by one they were placed at the back of the classroom, where the students liked to sit. The corpses on the podium had already dried up, or had long decayed into bones, and the flesh on the corpses had already disappeared. And the corpses in the middle still had flesh that hadn't completely decayed, and a swarm of green flies were buzzing around them. Lin Xiao looked at these corpses. At least on the podium she couldn't tell what they looked like. But whether they were old or young, perhaps she could tell from the shape of the bones. The ones in the middle could be distinguished from their clothes. Only the last few corpses had different degrees of decay. The floor of the classroom was covered with blood and dirt. Lin Xiao didn't go in because even if she stood by the window, she could clearly see the freshest corpses, but the smell inside made Lin Xiao dizzy. The smell of the old corpses and the smell of the new corpses mixed together. If she didn't separate them, Lin Xiao's nose would also be affected, so she could only use her eyes to see. Looking at the chests and heads of the fresh corpses were hollowed out, leaving only 2 bloody holes. The degree of death of these corpses didn't exceed 7 days. And each of them died at a different time. It was as if the level 5 zombie was lying on top of a man's body and gnawing on his skull. It bit by bit and then spat out the skull. This level 5 zombie was a child about 11 or 12 years old, and looked like a 5th or 6th grader. Its mouth was full of blood, and the two claws that were grabbing the corpse's head were also dyed black and red, and the clothes on its chest were dripping with blood. And the corpse it was eating now was a man, about 25 to 30 years old, and it had just died less than 2 hours ago. And his chest, where the heart should be, had been hollowed out. The childlike zombie took a big bite out of the man's head. Then it used its claws to dig into the brain and pulled out a bunch of tofu-like red and white things. Then it opened its mouth abnormally wide and used its hand to stuff the tofu-like things into its mouth. Baji baji, after stuffing a pile of white and some blood-red food into its mouth, the little zombie closed its mouth, moved its mouth a few times and swallowed. Lin Xiao frowned as he watched him eat by himself. A wisp of black mist slowly spread out from his hand and floated down Lin Xiao's leg. Then the black mist floated along the ground and into the classroom. The level 5 zombie didn't seem to be able to feel the thin black mist that Lin Xiao released. It was still eating, and even put its claw that was covered in brain matter into its mouth to suck. Just when Lin Xiao's black mist floated from the bottom of the table to his feet, the level 5 zombie suddenly stopped eating and looked around with a puzzled expression. Then because Lin Xiao's black mist was under his feet, and there were many tables blocking it, the little zombie looked around and didn't see anything, so it continued to eat. But soon, Lin Xiao's black mist floated to his feet, and then the black mist quietly condensed into a black rope that wrapped around the little zombie's foot. Roar dash, suddenly feeling that his foot was wrapped by something. The little zombie roared in shock and wanted to jump away. In the end, the black rope that was wrapped around the zombie's leg tested the zombie's leg and dragged him to the ground. Then Lin Xiao waved his hand and a large amount of black fog suddenly appeared and quickly surged into the room through the door and windows. Seeing the large amount of black mist, the zombie leader showed a frightened expression. Roar dash, he got up and wanted to run, but his foot was crooked and seemed to be missing a piece. He looked down in panic and found that he had lost one of his feet. Lin Xiao's black mist rope directly melted his foot. Just when he fell to the ground, Lin Xiao's black mist quickly covered him. Roar dash, the level 5 zombie struggled to get up. The black mist had swallowed a layer of his skin and flesh, and his whole body looked like it had been skinned and burned black. It was still a level 5 zombie, so it wouldn't be melted by Lin Xiao's black mist. He got up again, suddenly crouched down and jumped out of the window behind him. Bang! The glass on the window was directly smashed by him. But just a few seconds after he rushed out, the black mist behind him shook, and a figure jumped out. Puff dash, a claw directly inserted into the back of the level 5 zombie's head in midair, and then forcefully swung. Putong, the primary school zombie, was thrown to the ground below like a corpse. Lin Xiao then fell down, holding a level 5 zombie core in her hand. She raised her other hand and raised it towards the classroom behind her. Soon the black mist in the classroom upstairs surged out, and then gathered towards Lin Xiao's raised hand. The classroom upstairs was swept clean by the black mist, and at this time all the tables, chairs, and corpses had been turned into a piece of empty space by the black mist. Lin Xiao waved her hand, and a wisp of black mist flew towards the zombie's corpse, and then covered it. In less than 3 seconds the zombie below disappeared. After she withdrew the black mist, she took out a glass of water from her space, and after washing the zombie core in her hand, she put it away and then walked out of the school. Lin Xiao didn't know what was going on with her body. She had absorbed 80% of the level 7 energy core, but she still didn't feel any changes in her level. Even the energy in her mind didn't increase. Along the way, as long as she killed high-level zombies or encountered mutant plants with energy cores, she would take the time to stop and let little man absorb energy. However, she discovered that while there were many mutated plants, there were very few plants that could grow energy cores and become demons. From Hangzhou City to Hui City, she had only encountered 2 such plants during the 1,200-kilometer journey. She had killed a lot of high-level zombies. He had even killed 2 zombie kings. That's right, she killed them because they weren't willing to submit to her coercion. So Lin Xiao didn't bother to deal with them, and directly killed them to take the zombie cores. However, she absorbed 80% of the 2 level 6 zombie cores, 2 mutant plant energy cores, and dozens of level 4 and 5 zombie cores, and the rest was absorbed by little man. However, even with such a huge amount of energy entering Lin Xiao's body, she couldn't feel any breakthrough. Chapter 466. After dealing with the man-eating primary school zombie, Lin Xiao walked towards the direction where the smell of living people came from. There were people there, not necessarily in the direction of the base, but if there were people there, there must be intelligence. In a shopping mall a few kilometers away from the Pluto base, there was a parking lot, a supermarket, and a warehouse. At this time, a group of people were quietly staying in a hidden warehouse. It was dark inside, and because there was no power, there was no light in this sealed warehouse. There were more than 20 people squatting or lying in the warehouse. 5 or 6 of them were children. The youngest was 10 years old and the oldest was about 12 or 13 years old. These children were originally raised by people in the base, but because Long Yubai attacked the city, their parents died in battle. They were all boys. If it was girls or Yang Jianhua, Long Yubai would feel that they were useful, but boys were useless. So these children became the targets of elimination. The rest of the people were young men in their 20s or 30s. A few of them stood in the 4 corners of the room, holding flashlights in their hands, acting as light bulbs for everyone. In addition to these people, there was also a woman who looked about 30 years old. The woman sat by the door, holding a pistol in her hand and turning a few bullets in her palm. Sister Wan, they have been out for a whole day, they should be back by now. A child of about 12 years old couldn't help but ask because he was sitting close to the woman. Duan Wan's hand that was playing with the bullets paused slightly. Then she turned to the child and nodded. And they should be back soon, be patient. Could it be that they have been discovered? Every time they sneak into the base to find food, it's too risky. A thin man next to her said with a worried expression, if they don't go to the original base to find food, then do you think there will be anything to eat outside? The area within 100 miles of the base has already been swept countless times. What food can they find? Eat dirt? Now we can only see if they can successfully bring out some food from the base. Duan Wan said indifferently. The others looked at Duan Wan, and after thinking about it, they couldn't help but ask the question they had asked countless times these days. How long do we have to wait before we can leave? Duan Wan, you keep telling us to wait. We have waited for so many days, can't we leave? Duan Wan looked in the direction of that person and said, wait for the news that Yang Jianhua brings back? But Yang Jianhua has been back for so many days. What kind of news can he bring back? Can't you find out? The man asked in confusion. That's why Li Hongsheng and the others were gone for so long today. They should have brought back some news. Duan Wan said with uncertainty. Sister Wan, I'm hungry. A little boy beside her muttered. At this moment, Duan Wan suddenly felt movement outside the door. She couldn't care less about the child's cry of hunger. She quickly and nimbly loaded the bullets into the magazine, then buckled the magazine on the gun. She turned around and leaned against the thick gap of the door to listen outside. Seeing her actions, the others immediately became alert and stared at her quietly. Hearing the familiar footsteps coming closer, Duan Wan heaved a sigh of relief. She turned around and said, they're back. Although she said so, she didn't open the door immediately. Sure enough, not long after, someone knocked on the door. Duan Wan, it's us. Hearing Li Hongsheng's voice, Duan Wan called 2 men over to help open the door. After the door was opened, she saw a few men outside holding flashlights. Seeing the door open, they immediately flashed in. After everyone came in, they immediately closed the door tightly. But when she thought that Long Yubai personally went after them, she couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. Li Hongsheng thought about it and said, I think that his purpose in going there might not be just to deal with the captain and the others. Chapter 467. That's possible, but Long Yubai still won't let the commander and the others go. He's really a scum. The base has already been destroyed by him, what else does he want? Duan Wan nodded and gritted her teeth in hatred. This Long Yubai has always been a very ambitious person, and he looks like he's very kind on the outside, but he's actually a cruel and merciless person. I think his purpose for going to Sea City this time isn't simple, Li Hongsheng suddenly said after thinking about it. Duan Wan looked at him blankly for a moment, her eyes flashing a few times before looking at him with some hesitation. You mean it can't be? Does he have such a big appetite? Can he eat Sea City base? Li Hongsheng shook his head and said, I'm just guessing, there's no proof, so I can't make a judgment. Duanwan thought about it and felt that it wasn't very likely. If Long Yubai's purpose for going to Sea City this time was to investigate or infiltrate Sea City other than Yuan Tianqing and the others, then it was very likely that he would do it. Because in Long Yubai's eyes, a mere Netherworld King's base with a few 100,000 survivors was not enough to satisfy his ambition. However, when she thought about Long Yubai's ability, he might not be capable, but he had many ways to rope in helpers. If he had such an idea, it wasn't impossible. Duanwan thought about it and suddenly felt that Li Hongxing's guess was still possible. Now that you mention it, I feel that he does indeed have this ambition. Just our Netherworld King's base alone is not enough to satisfy him. Li Hongxing nodded, then asked her what she planned to do next. Then what should we do next? Right now, Yang Jianhua is still guarding the base, and I also heard some bad news. Yang Jianhua starved those ordinary people to death. They starved them to death. Li Hongxing's face darkened when he said that Yang Jianhua had locked up those innocent people and starved them to death. Duanwan was stunned when she heard that. Then she stared at Li Hongxing with a shocked expression. What did you say? He starved them to death? Didn't you say that he and Long Yubai would bring them to Earth Dragon Base? No, those who were brought to Earth Dragon Base were all less than 30 years old. Those who were left behind were all old, weak, sick, and disabled. Furthermore, it was said that Long Yubai had given the order to kill all these ordinary people. It was just that Yang Jianhua had not taken action yet. However, he has already started to cut off food and water for the captives. Li Hongsheng shook his head. They are simply too inhumane. This Yang Jianhua and Long Yubai are simply two beasts. Duanwan's eyes widened in disbelief. Li Hongsheng continued, however, it seems like Yang Jianhua will keep the families of those soldiers alive, but the number will probably not be many. Although they knew that Yang Jianhua would still use those relatives to restrict the freedom of the soldiers, the number of people was not high. Since so many people had died after the apocalypse, everyone's family members were basically dead. Even if there were any who were still alive, there were very few who could be found by their side after spending so many years. The others around them also heard their conversation, and they all fell silent. Duanwan gritted her teeth and asked, Is Yang Jianhua preparing to wipe out all the survivors in Hell King's base? In that case, how many people could survive? He's simply an inhumane scum. Towards the end, she already didn't know what words to use to describe this cruel and inhumane tyrant Yang Jianhua. No, he's not going to wipe out the Hell King's base. He's just giving up because Yang Jianhua has already discussed with Long Yubai that he will bring all the Hell King's resources to the Earth Dragon base. Therefore, very soon, not only will the people in the Hell King's base be killed, but the base will also be destroyed. Li Hongsheng shook his head and said in a heavy tone. Duanwan fell silent. After a while she muttered, Are we really going to leave here? If we leave here, where can we go? Sea City? In Duanwan's heart, she didn't want to leave this base. Because she had lived here for 5 years, she had always regarded this place as her home. However, now that her home had been destroyed, they had no choice but to live outside, hiding in the zombies' territory. In their team there weren't many people with abilities. More than 20 people, excluding a few teenagers, came down. As for the other ordinary people, there were 7 or 8. Duanwan now led Li Hongsheng and the others to protect the lives of these ordinary people and children. She also had to go out to inquire about information and look for food. After spending so much effort outside the Hell King's base, she wanted to see if there would be a chance to return to the base. However, now that Yang Jianhua actually intended to destroy the entire base, the wall used to block the zombies would be the first to be destroyed. Then there would be no protection in the base. Big Sister Wan, didn't we agree to leave here? After hearing Duanwan's muttering, the children on the side were somewhat puzzled and pulled her to ask. Duanwan lowered her head to look at the children's expectant eyes. She could only sigh and nod. And we will leave. The children continued to ask. Then where are we going? Is there food? Is there a blanket? For him, as long as there was food, a bed to sleep on, and a blanket to cover him, that was the happiest thing. Because the weather was cold. Because this warehouse was in the basement compared to the night temperature above ground, the temperature here was a little higher. In fact, these children and the ordinary adults here had some old and dirty blankets, thick clothes and so on. Because there was not enough blankets, there were also 2 people huddled together to keep warm. However, this was only temporary. Fortunately, because this was the south, it was not very cold right now. However, everyone knew that the current situation could not continue because in another half a month, it was estimated that there would be a big drop in temperature. At night, everyone would not be able to withstand the cold. Li Hongsheng looked at her and said, "How about we also go find Deputy Leader Yuan and the others? Apart from this, I can't think of any other way. They could still maintain for a short period of time, but what about in the future? They had to have a long-term plan, otherwise everyone might lose confidence and persevere." Duan Wan was silent for a few seconds before nodding. "If the situation is really as you said, and Yang Jianhua is going to starve everyone to death, then we still have to go back and take a look. We can only collect enough supplies and food from the base before we can run the long distance to Sea City." Li Hongsheng nodded. After all, if they wanted to collect enough supplies now, returning to the base was the easiest way to get them. Duan Wan asked, "Do you know when Yang Jianhua is going to take everyone to evacuate?" "Not yet." Li Hongsheng shook his head. Chapter 468. Lin Xiao leaned against Duan Wan quietly. When she was outside, Li Hongsheng and the others happened to return. Therefore, she followed them down to secretly gather some information. She did not expect to see Duan Wan here. She looked at the conversation and attitude of these people and knew that Duan Wan and Li Hongsheng were the leaders here. She knew Duan Wan. She only knew Duan Wan. She didn't know anyone else, including the man who was talking to Duan Wan. However, Lin Xiao was very happy to see an acquaintance here. However, after hearing the conversation between the 2 of them, her heart sank again. Yang Jianhua deserved to die. However, before killing that man, she might be able to make a deal with Duan Wan and the others. With her current appearance, she could not get close to Duan Wan the moment she appeared. She knew Duan Wan, but Duan Wan did not recognize her now. But it should be soon. Li Hongsheng replied to Duan Wan's question about when Yang Jianhua would leave with everyone. The surrounding people could not help but say with hatred, Are we going to let this bastard leave so easily? He made us homeless and killed so many people. Even the leader of the Netherfire was forced to death. Are we going to let him go just like that? I can't accept this." Duan Wan was stunned when she heard that. She turned to look at the person. It was a child around 13 years old. His voice still had the childish clarity of a child, but his tone was filled with deep hatred. The little boy said unwillingly when he heard Duan Wan say that they were leaving just like that. The others shone their flashlights on the child's face. When they saw his expression, everyone felt the same unwillingness. However, what could they do even if they were unwilling? They did not have the ability to kill Yang Jianhua now. They could not even deal with his subordinates, let alone Yang Jianhua. Duan Wan sighed and walked in front of the child. She said to him, "So what if I can't accept this? We don't have the ability to kill him now. We will only be sending ourselves to our deaths if we go. Have you forgotten about the companions who went a few days ago and never came back? Previously, their team didn't only have this many people. Back then, hundreds of people had gathered together. However, many people hated Yang Jianhua and Long Yubai to the bone, so they couldn't help but want to deal with them. At that time, Yang Jianhua had not returned, so Long Yubai was in the base. However, Long Yubai's subordinates were powerful, so every time he went, some people would be sacrificed. After a few times, only Duan Wan's group was left. The little boy gritted his teeth, his eyes wide open, filled with intense killing intent and hatred. He said, "It's because everyone is dead that we can't let that scumbag Yang Jianhua live like this. Sister Wan, please think of another way. I don't want to see everyone die in vain." As he spoke, he tried his best to widen his eyes and they suddenly turned red. Duan Wan looked at him. In her heart, she also wanted to cut Yang Jianhua into 8 pieces like they did. However, if they went there now, they would only be sending themselves to death. What else could she do? "No, we can't deal with him now. If we want to deal with him, we'll have to wait until we have the strength to do so. As long as there's life, there's hope. Listen to me, all we have to do now is endure. She patiently persuaded everyone. If you can help you kill Yang Jianhua, can you promise me one thing? Suddenly, a light voice rang out among the crowd. Because the light in the warehouse was not strong, they suddenly heard an unfamiliar voice. Everyone was stunned for a moment. Who is it? Duan Wan was the first to react. She instantly raised her gun, and her movements were so fast that they could not see it clearly. In the blink of an eye, she raised the gun and scanned the surroundings vigilantly. After the others came back to their senses, they immediately took out their guns and raised them in their hands. Soon they were all aimed at Lin Xiao, who had suddenly appeared behind Duan Wan. Duan Wan also reacted quickly. When she saw everyone staring at her back, she instantly turned around to avoid this position. Lin Xiao raised her hands in a gesture of surrender. She said with a faint smile, "I'm here to help. Don't be so nervous." She glanced at the people who had retreated the furthest away from her in an instant. Finally, her gaze moved to Duan Wan's face. At this moment, Duan Wan was as shocked as everyone else. How did this woman sneak in without making a sound? However, she quickly glanced at Li Hongsheng and saw that he was also very surprised. Only then did she have some ideas in her mind. It seemed that this woman took the opportunity to sneak in when Li Hongsheng came back. However, just now, everyone's lights were indeed shining at the door. They saw Li Hongsheng and the others come in one by one. There was no one else. However, she knew that Li Hongsheng and the others must have brought her in from outside. Who are you? How did you get in? Duan Wan stared at Lin Xiao. Her eyes were very calm. However, such a calm Duan Wan's action of raising her gun showed that she had entered a high state of preparation for an attack. In a flash, Lin Xiao disappeared without a trace in front of everyone's eyes. Duan Wan and the others widened their eyes in shock again, and began to search around in panic. However, this warehouse was not big and there were only a few people. This woman who suddenly appeared had no place to hide. Don't worry about how I got in. I just want to know, do you want Yang Jianhua to die? Lin Xiao appeared in front of Duan Wan again. She looked at her and said, "Don't worry. If I wanted to harm you, I wouldn't have appeared in front of you. Can you put down your gun?" She trusted Duan Wan's judgment, so she patiently talked to her in front of her instead of directly taking away their weapons. Who are you? Why should we believe you? A man next to her held a gun, stared at Lin Xiao and shouted nervously. Duan Wan stared at Lin Xiao for 7 or 8 seconds before she slowly put her gun away. Duan Wan. Seeing her put away her gun, the others were shocked. They didn't expect Duan Wan to believe her. After Duan Wan put the gun back into the holster, she raised her right hand, which was wearing a half-finger combat glove. "Put down your guns." Duan Wan, do you believe her? The others didn't listen to her and put down their guns. Instead, they stared at Duan Wan angrily. Duan Wan turned around and looked at everyone who was tense. Then she turned to Lin Xiao and said, "She has an invisibility skill. If she wants to deal with us, she doesn't need to appear at all. She can kill us all from behind. Li Hongsheng, can you sense her presence?" She looked at Li Hongsheng and said the last sentence. Li Hongsheng quietly glanced at Lin Xiao before putting his gun away. "I can't sense her." Chapter 469. That's right, Li Hongsheng was a Logia user. His perception was the strongest among everyone here. If he couldn't sense it, then no one else would know. Therefore, without anyone knowing, the other party had already silently sneaked up to them. If the other party directly attacked them from behind, how many people would survive? That was because the other party didn't have any hostility, so she suddenly appeared in front of everyone. Although Duan Wan and Li Hongsheng didn't believe the woman in front of them, they weren't nervous to the point of holding their guns. Although the two of them had put away their guns, the others didn't. They were still holding their guns. Duan Wan looked at the unfamiliar woman in front of her. There was almost no aura on her body. She was wearing sunglasses, so her eyes couldn't be seen. She was wearing a camouflage uniform, not an official military uniform. However, she didn't have a gun holster. When walking outside the base, whether it was an ordinary person or a metahuman, who didn't have a set of weapons. But the woman in front of them didn't. How are you going to help us deal with Yang Jianhua? Duanwan didn't directly ask the woman how she could help them, but how she wanted to help. Lin Xiao looked at Duanwan and found that her appearance had indeed changed, but it wasn't a big change. Just like the first time she saw Yuan Tianxing Lin Feng and the others, there wasn't a big change. It was as if they had been separated for a long time. Seeing Duanwan ask her calmly, Lin Xiao said, I have a way, and you don't need to do anything. You can just watch from the side. If you really want him dead, I can do it. Duanwan looked at her suspiciously. Are you sure? She knew that this person might have a way to kill everyone here, but Yang Jianhua was different from them. He couldn't be killed at will. After all, he was a peak rank 6 arcanist. If you don't believe me, you can come with me to the Netherworld King's base. If I can kill Yang Jianhua, can you promise me one thing? Lin Xiao thought for a moment. She couldn't beat Yang Jianhua before. But it was different now. She had risen to rank 6 so she could kill Yang Jianhua. But in order to make these people believe her, she could kill him first. Anyway, if the rumors were true, that Yang Jianhua had really set such a big trap for her after the apocalypse, then killing him now could be considered as revenge for herself. Okay, if you can really kill him, then I can do anything for you. Duanwan nodded readily and asked her conditions. Lin Xiao asked, I think you should know where the leader of the Underworld King's base disappeared, right? She almost wanted to say where she died, but she couldn't keep saying that she died. It would be like cursing herself. Hearing her conditions, Duanwan and the others were stunned for a moment. Why are you asking about that place? Duanwan couldn't help but ask. That's none of your business. Just tell me where it is. How is it? I help you kill and you give me information. This deal is not considered a loss for you, right? Lin Xiao said with a faint smile. How do you know that we definitely know where that place is? Li Hongxing suddenly asked. Lin Xiao glanced at him, then smiled and said, Of course I know, because I also have the perception skill. She naturally wouldn't tell them that when she asked this question, she could vaguely sense their thoughts. The others might not know, but Duanwan and Li Hongxing had something flash in their minds, so Lin Xiao naturally knew that these two should know. Duanwan didn't have any other opinions and directly replied, Okay, if you can help us kill that scum Yang Jianhua first, don't say that I will take you to that place. I will do anything for you. Okay, then it's settled. Tomorrow, I will set off to the Underworld King's base. If you want to follow, remember to stay far away. Lin Xiao clapped her hands and nodded. Duanwan also nodded, then watched as Lin Xiao turned around and opened the door, then suddenly left. She came suddenly and left quickly. Li Hongxing turned his head to look at Duanwan and asked with some uncertainty, Can she really do it? We'll know tomorrow. Moreover, the place she wants to go to is actually not considered a secret. I feel that she originally wanted to kill Yang Jianhua. Duanwan crossed her arms over her chest and held her chin as she thought about it. Li Hongxing looked at her without saying anything, and the others were also puzzled and curious. This woman who suddenly appeared, who was she? The next morning, Lin Xiao headed towards the Underworld King's base. Following the scent of humans from afar, he walked towards the road that had been cleared. Not long after, Lin Xiao arrived at the address of the Underworld King's base. Standing on a tall building far away, Lin Xiao looked at the base's wall that was 700 to 800 meters away. The wall was originally 10 meters high, but there were many holes at the top. Fortunately, the bottom of the wall was still intact, otherwise the zombies would probably be able to climb in. Originally, there was a spacious area outside the wall, but now this spacious area was filled with zombies piled up under the wall. The zombies also didn't completely surround the wall, but were gathered in a few locations. These locations were 10 meters away from the entrance of the base. There were tens of thousands of zombies gathered at the corner of the wall, and each and every one of them wanted to climb up. This was because there were rows of living people hanging on the wall. Lin Xiao looked at the weak humans hanging outside the wall, narrowed his eyes slightly, and looked at the entrance of the base. This Yang Jianhua and Long Yubai actually used living people to lure the zombies away from the entrance of the base. so that when they went out and entered, they wouldn't be attacked by the zombies. Moreover, there wasn't only one place where the living people were hanging on the wall but several places. Below the wall where the people were hanging, there were densely packed ordinary zombies. Occasionally 1 or 2 level 2 or 3 zombies wouldn't be able to come out, and they would jump up high, grab the legs of the fallen people and then forcefully pull them down. That person would be torn into 2 from the middle, and his intestines and blood would fall from above, immediately causing the ordinary zombies below to go crazy. Then, someone would immediately cut the rope on the corpse that had been torn apart, and the upper half of the body would fall down as well, directly becoming food for the zombies. Then, another person would fall from above, and the struggling and screaming living person would fall down. It was simply impossible to look straight at. Using such a cruel method to deal with the ordinary people of the original base, Yang Jianhua and Long Yubai were really crazy perverts. Lin Xiao thought in his heart while gnashing his teeth. Chapter 470. After looking at the situation on the wall, she jumped down from the 20-story building and headed towards the gate of the base. The gate was closed. It was obvious that the inside was sealed. Lin Xiao walked for a few minutes and arrived at the gate. Seeing that the heavy metal gate was tightly shut, she could use the black mist to corrode a hole in the steel gate. But she didn't do so. She stood by the door and raised her head to look at the captives on both sides of the wall. She turned her head to look at them, and then walked to a gap in the wall. After retreating a few meters, she ran 2 steps and leaped up with all her might, directly jumping onto the gap in the wall. After seeing the scene inside, Lin Xiao frowned. Inside the base, most of the buildings had either collapsed or were half destroyed. There was a big hole on the right and a big pit on the west. Most of the buildings had been burned, bombed, and were in ruins. This was the outer district, so the buildings in the outer district were basically used by Long Yubai when he attacked the city a few months ago, allowing the ability users to unleash their ultimate moves or attack with powerful firepower. At that time, all kinds of artillery shells were used and even tanks were used. So the Hell King's base was now a scene of devastation. Lin Xiao looked at the destroyed buildings outside the base area. He leaped onto the roof of another building that had a huge hole in the middle. Then he dashed towards the direction of the inner area. At this time, outside the base, Duan Wan and Li Hongsheng were standing on a building outside the outer district, holding binoculars and quietly looking at the wall. Will she really go? A man beside her asked. I don't know, let's wait and see. Duan Wan looked at the bridge of her nose as she replied. Li Hongsheng also looked at the wall and said, Do you believe she can kill Yang Jianhua? Even if his ability is only rank 6, his military weapons are not to be trifled with. What are you worried about? Didn't you see how she sneaked into our place last night? You didn't see it. Maybe she can really sneak attack Yang Jianhua? Duan Wan put down the binoculars and then continued to say, Since she said she was so confident, she shouldn't be here to coax us. Is it really necessary? Li Hongsheng felt that she was right. He nodded, took the binoculars from her, and looked at them in front of his eyes. Then he realized that he was wearing another pair of glasses. He thought about it and handed the binoculars to the person next to him. Duan Wan said, Continue to keep an eye on that place. Tell me if there's any information. As she spoke, she walked towards the stairwell. On the other side, Lin Xiao leaped over the dilapidated buildings and soon arrived at the inner district. The environment and buildings in the inner district were still 90% intact, and after entering they saw a large number of people moving about. The walls of the inner area were not as high as the outer area, about 5 to 6 meters. Lin Xiao stood on top of the wall and looked at the large number of trucks and chariots parked in the square of the inner district. Many soldiers were moving all kinds of supplies onto the trucks. Lin Xiao jumped down from the wall and looked for Yang Jianhua's aura. In fact, Yang Jianhua's location was not the only one. He was on a certain floor of a building next to the square. He was standing in front of the window with a cup in his hand, watching the movement downstairs. He had no idea that a crisis was approaching him. Lin Xiao jumped to the first floor of the square, which was not very high. She could mainly see Yang Jianhua, who was opposite her. She looked at him hesitantly. If she was not mistaken, This scumbag's superpower level seemed to have broken through. He gave her a sense of oppression similar to that of Yang Chao, Tang He, and the others. However, this sense of oppression did not affect Lin Chao much, but she could tell the other party's level. What's going on? This scumbag just came back for a while. How did he suddenly break through? Lin Chao's eyes flashed as she thought about it in puzzlement. At the same time, her figure flashed and she leaped toward the building where Yang Jianhua was. Her toes tapped on a high-voltage utility pole or a car roof, and she finally landed in front of the building's entrance. She did not walk into the hall, nor did she plan to climb up the stairs. If her judgment was correct, Yang Jianhua should be around the 11th or 12th floor. Although climbing the stairs would not be tiring, it would take some time. Lin Xiao looked up at the floor of the building and jumped up directly. Her claws popped out and easily grabbed the edge of the floor. Then she grabbed the windows and flipped up. After a few jumps, she arrived at Yang Jianhua's floor. She did not directly go to the room where Yang Jianhua was. Instead, she flipped through the window of the next room. When she walked out of the next room, she happened to see another man walking into Yang Jianhua's office. "Leader, it will be done in the afternoon." Lu Yu came in with the list and said to Yang Jianhua by the window. Yang Jianhua turned back to look at Lu Yu and then looked outside. "Well, how are the bombs going?" he asked. "The inner area has been set up. Now they are setting up the outer area and the city wall," Lu Yu replied. Yang Jianhua said, "Tell them to move faster. When they are ready, we will leave in the afternoon." "Yes," Lu Yu nodded in response. Yang Jianhua raised his head, and his delicate and handsome 5 palaces stood out. He looked in the direction of the Earth Dragon base, and his eyes flashed. "Long Yu Bai, I said I would stay here, but you must let me go to the Earth Dragon base with you. Then I will let you do as you wish. But in the future, your position as leader will have to be given to me." As he said that, he raised one side of his mouth and revealed a wicked and proud smile. "Leader, using those ordinary people to whet the appetite of the zombies outside has attracted a lot of high-level zombies. The death rate of those people is much higher. Basically, more than a dozen people have to go up every hour." Lu Yu suddenly reported about using living people as bait. "How many people are left as bait?" Yang Jianhua slightly lowered his head, glanced at him and asked. "Less than 30,000. Lu Yu replied. Yang Jianhua frowned and turned back to look at him. "There are still 30,000? That's too many. We can't take so many captives. 500 will be used to distract the zombies on the road, and the rest will be thrown into the zombie crowd." "Yes." Lu Yu nodded and asked with some hesitation, "Then I will go now?" "Go. If you don't go now, do you want to stay until the afternoon?" Yang Jianhua glared at him. "Yes." Lu Yu immediately turned around and left. Lin Xiao leaned against the door and listened to the conversation between the two. Looking at Lu Yu who walked out in front of him, he suddenly turned around and silently followed him to the stairs. When Lu Yu walked down the middle of the stairs and there was no one around, Lin Xiao suddenly raised his hand and grabbed the back of his collar, silently bringing him into the space. Chapter 471. Lu Yu was pulled by someone. He was stunned for a moment, but when he turned his head, he found that he had suddenly gone from the corridor to another place. He was in a strange environment, and he had inexplicably arrived in this strange place. Lu Yu immediately tensed up. Who? Since someone pulled him, it must be that person who brought him to this place. Lu Yu quickly looked back and saw a middle-haired woman wearing sunglasses standing quietly behind him. "Who are you?" Lu Yu was shocked and instinctively took a few steps back, distancing himself from Lin Xiao. He vigilantly looked at the woman who suddenly appeared and took him to another place, while secretly looking at the surrounding environment. Helping the tyrant. Lin Xiao stared at him coldly and said. When Lu Yu heard her cold voice, he was stunned for a moment, but he quickly understood what she meant. What? Are you here to deal with our leader? He calmly looked at Lin Xiao, sneered and replied. Yes, today not only you but Yang Jianhua will be the first to die. However, before I take care of him, you can't die yet. Lin Xiao nodded and said faintly, just by yourself? Can you do it? Lu Yu disdainfully laughed and continued, do you think you can kill a level 7 psychic just because you want to? Lin Xiao looked at him and said indifferently, it's only level 7. If he has the ability to break through to level 8, then of course I can't kill him. As she spoke, she turned and walked in the direction of the small building. Lu Yu saw that she turned around so carelessly and turned her back to him. He was delighted and thought that this woman was too arrogant to dare to expose her back door. He suddenly waved his hand at Lin Xiao, preparing to release his ability to attack her. But something unexpected happened. His ability was fire. He originally planned to burst out a fireball to hit the woman, but when he condensed his energy, he suddenly found that he couldn't release the fireball. Lu Yu looked at his hand with some surprise, and he was a little flustered about the fact that he couldn't release his ability. At this time, Lin Xiao turned around and said to him, you can't release your ability? Do you know what this place is? If you don't want to be eaten by zombies, come with me. After saying that, she continued to walk forward and quickly entered the door of the small building. What does that mean? Zombies? Is it here? For a moment, Lu Yu didn't understand what she meant. He looked around blankly. At this moment, a figure suddenly stood up from the other side of the wall outside the building. When he took a closer look, Lu Yu's expression changed, and he uncontrollably took a step back. The person who came out had a face full of wounds, dark eyes and thick dark circles around his eyes. Although his mouth didn't open, his eyes clearly told Lu Yu that he was a zombie. Moreover, it was a high-level zombie. Anyone with good eyesight would be able to tell that this was a level 4 adept zombie. But the next scene caused Lu Yu to take a few steps back. Because behind this advanced zombie, another one walked out at this time. It had the same heavy dark circles and light black eyes without the scara. And this one's mouth had split open, and all the teeth in the mouth were exposed. Before Lu Yu could finish looking at the second zombie, a third came out, then a fourth. Then he looked at the many high-level zombies that came out one after another in horror. At a glance, there were more than a dozen of them. Roar dash, these high-level zombies stared at Lu Yu with a hungry look, but the dark eyes flashed with excitement. Are you still not coming over? Do you want to stand there and wait for the zombies to rush over? At this time, Lin Xiao, who had already walked in, suddenly appeared at the door and stood there to say to Lu Yu. Lu Yu's brain wasn't enough to process at this time. Even if Lin Xiao asked him to go over now, he still couldn't react. Why were there so many zombies here? And all of them were high-level zombies. There were more than a dozen of them. What was this situation? Usually, he had never encountered 2 or more than 3 level 4 zombies together. Moreover, why did these zombies turn a blind eye to that woman? Who was she at most? What kind of place was this? At this moment, suddenly a figure jumped from the top of the building toward Lu Yu. Roar dash, the figure that jumped over landed 3 meters in front of Lu Yu and roared at him. Lu Yu looked at the top of the head that was wrapped in bandages, but there was a clear dent on the top of the head. Its eyes were dark, but there was a touch of gold in the middle. It had the same familiar thick eye circles as zombies, and the familiar twisted expression. This was a level 5 zombie leader. There was actually a zombie leader here. After recognizing this zombie leader, Lu Yu's whole body froze. The fear of death instantly enveloped his whole body. Lu Yu knew that he was a level 5 psychic and knew his combat strength. Although he could defeat one level 4 zombie, he was powerless against 2 or 3 of them. But at this time he wasn't facing 2 or 3 but a group, and even a level 5 zombie leader. Under such circumstances, even if he was at his peak, he would definitely die, not to mention the current him, he couldn't even use his ability. So Lu Yu was directly stunned, his whole body stiff as he stared at the zombie leader 3 meters in front of him. If it wasn't for his strong psychological quality, his legs would have gone soft at this time. At this moment, Lin Xiao shouted at the zombie leader. Number 8, bring him over, he can't walk anymore. Pay attention to your claws, don't scratch him. After saying that, Lin Xiao turned back into the small building. Who? Cho Lily asked her strangely. A captive. Lily, I have a task for you. Come here. Lin Xiao habitually said that she wanted Cho Lily to help her with a task. Cho Lily didn't care about what she said and immediately walked towards her. Lin Xiao pointed to the door and said to her later, if zombie leader number 8 brings that man in, you find a way to make him surrender to us. Tell us the location of all the bombs buried in Hades' base and the triggers. Finally, you have to control him and don't let him run around. Can you do that? Qiu Lily nodded. This wasn't a difficult thing to do. Soon the bandaged zombie dragged Lu Yu in. Lu Yu's expression was very panicked. He couldn't even walk properly. When he walked up the 2 steps of the door, he almost fell. It was the zombie leader who dragged him in by the collar. You're so scared," Qiu Lily said as soon as she saw him. Lin Xiao nodded and said, okay, you do the rest. I'm going to go out and deal with that scum. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.